There we go, folks. We are about to call to order. We all are calling to order the 137th meeting of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission, October 23rd, 2014, at the Convention Center. First item on the agenda is approval of minutes. Commissioner McHugh.
The minutes, there are several sets of minutes in the book, Mr. Chairman, and I am fully prepared to deal with them seriatim. And so I would first ask that we take up the minutes of meeting 134, which was the licensing hearing, a set of minutes. I'm going to recommend that we make two additions, though, to those minutes, and the first is both are in the list of documents used at the meeting. And I would recommend that we change the initial listing, which simply says documents, presentations, so that we list each of the presentations, the 5 presentations, so it's clear what we're talking about there. And then finally, that we add to the list of documents the signed agreement that came at the end of the meeting. So with those two additions, two amendments, I'd move that the minutes be approved as they appear in the book.
Any other discussion? I will abstain from this vote since that was a meeting I did not attend on Region A. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it 4-0 with the chairman abstained.
All right, and then the next set of minutes is for a regular meeting on September 25, 2014. Those minutes too are in the book, and I'd move their approval as they appear, with the usual reservation for typographical and mechanical errors, correction of typographical and mechanical errors.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
And finally, the minutes of our regular meeting on October 9, 2014. They too are in the book, and I would move their approval with the usual reservations as they appear there.
Do we want to make some note that Chairman Crosby participated in the end of the meeting after we had the Region A discussion? It talks about him being recused, but obviously he joined us later in the meeting.
Yes, we should, that's a good catch. We should make that correction.
Yeah, and I couldn't quite figure out, it looks like you adjourned. Oh, you made the motion. Okay,
Right.
I think I was back, right.
Right.
So it's whatever the moment at which I came back to the meeting
Right.
should be noted, I agree.
Which was right after we finished with Region A.
Yeah, right after the recess.
Right.
Approval of minutes?
Yeah, at 11:10 a.m., the approval of the minutes, you were there for that, so
Right.
we'll make that correction there.
Any other discussion with that amendment? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it unanimously. We are then to item number 3, Administration, Executive Director Day.
Good morning, Chairman Crosby and Commissioners.
Good morning.
I'd like to begin this morning, and I think positive you all recall, but it bears just mentioning quickly, is the Commission has set up through its regulations and through ours to obtain the appropriate expertise, to set up a system to monitor the casino projects and of course the Penn project. I'd like to take a little bit of time, except I can't put it on my notes, but I'd like to take a little bit of your time to introduce our project monitors for regions A and B. So we'll begin with the MGM project. Springfield selected Pink & Company. Jennifer Pink holds an MBA from the Simmons School of Management, and she's president and founder of Pink & Company.
Hang on a sec.
Something's
Rob, have we got the feed? All set? Okay.
Jennifer built her career from the ground up, working her way through the construction industry to hold senior management positions for both of the region's recent mega projects, the Boston Harbor project and the Big Dig. Over the past 15 years, Pink & Company has managed over $2 billion worth of projects from some of the area's premier organizations. The firm specializes in nonprofit, institutional, and public sector.
Rick, you want to change the
Change the mics.
mics?
Well, so we get the bugs worked out while I'm doing this, the introduction.
This is nothing against Jennifer.
Oh, try. Stand by, Jennifer. Anyway, we'll try this again. Over the past 15 years, that is much clearer. Over the past 15 years, Pink & Company has managed over $2 billion worth of projects for some of the area's premier organizations. The firm specializes in nonprofit, institutional, and public sector and is an advocate for sustainable development, helping to create better buildings and stronger communities. Pink & Company also, of course, serves as the Commission's monitor for the Penn project. Should also note Pink & Company supported the Commission's evaluation process in your decisions about which licensee gets licensed. So I'd like to refer to Jennifer to introduce her staff that's here today. Jennifer.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Commissioners, nice to see you again, and thank you very much. You do know Pink & Company. I think we've been working with you now for about the past 15 months, but I would like to take the opportunity for your benefit as well as anybody who may be streaming and our audience here to say hello. Jennifer Pink. As Rick said, we've been in business about 15 years, and would like also to let you know, as of yesterday, we got our DBE certification, which is a nice additional credential that the company has and hopes to take advantage of. We're ready to go to work in Springfield. You know us in Plainville. And briefly, I will introduce the two persons who are managing those projects on our behalf and for you. Mike Fitzgerald, New England native. I think you're born in Connecticut.
Born in Massachusetts.
Massachusetts. He, a 22-year veteran of the Army Corps of Engineers with a degree in civil engineering and is a licensed PE in civil engineering, and he'll be assigned to the Springfield project for us. And Dane Wigfall, who you also know. Dane is a California native who is enjoying New England's Northeasters, like we're having this morning, who also has a civil engineering degree from UC Berkeley and has been involved in his career in many heavy civil highway projects on both a direct management and an oversight role. And so we're looking forward to working with you and MGM in Springfield, really seeing the transformation of that downtown and the region, and continuing to work with Penn, who's been a great licensee. We really enjoyed that relationship and bringing that online. I know they're anxious to get themselves up and running, and we'll see that midway through next year. And I am going to excuse myself this morning. I unfortunately have to leave, but my two project managers here will certainly be able to continue their work.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer, and I understand Dane's vehicle had to learn how to swim itself this morning a little bit, so we're glad you got here safely, Dane. We've also selected PMA for the wind project in Everett. Mr. Stephen Ristiska is a managing director for PMA, Consultants of New England Region, and will lead the PMA team providing oversight and OPM services for the Region A. Steve holds a Master of Science and Bachelor of Science degrees in Civil Engineering from Northeastern University, is a member of the Northeastern University Civil and Environmental Engineering Department Advisory Board. In addition, Steve has significant experience in the areas of owner's project management and owner's representative. PMA Consultants is a nationally recognized consulting firm providing owner's project management, project controls, and dispute avoidance. It was founded in 1971 and as well as 12 offices nationally. So with that, I'll refer to Steve for introduction of his staff. Steve.
Guess I'll come up. Oh, come up to the microphone. Thank you very much for selecting PMA for Region A. We're very excited about it. I brought my team with me. Unfortunately, they're 2 rows behind me, but they'll stand or wave their hand when I mention them. Chad Crittenden is going to be our lead person and our senior project manager. Jason Lawson will be our full-time person on site, working closely with the WIN team. Angel Avalo, who you know well, will continue in his role with project controls and scheduling and planning. And Ken Leclerc is going to be an assistant to myself and to Chad, helping with anything that we need along the way. So we're very excited about it and looking forward to getting started.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Can I just also note in the introduction, PMA is also a minority business enterprise, just for the record.
Right.
Thank you, Commissioner Zuniga. If I might, I had one other thing this morning I would like to start just to make a note of. We should also briefly recognize that the Commission has conducted hearings led by Commissioner Cameron on racing license applications over the past few weeks. Commissioner Stebbins was also able to attend 2 of the hearings. The hearings were in Brockton, where the Commission considered the Brockton Agricultural Society and listened to public comment. It's a placeholder application for one-day live racing, thoroughbred racing, which may be able to expand to 15 days. Also, the Middleborough Agricultural Society is a placeholder application for a similar period. In Plainville, the Commission was also there. Springfield Gaming and Redevelopment. The application was to conduct 105 live harness racing live days, harness racing meet at the Plain Ridge Course in Plainville, Massachusetts. The proposed meet will be conducted primarily on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays in April. And then in Boston, the New England Horsemen's Benevolent and Protective Association has submitted an application for one-day live thoroughbred horse racing meet at Suffolk Downs. May be amended later during the year in the application process. Those applications are been posted and are pending a 30-day comment period from the Commission. From that point, I don't know if Commissioner Cameron or Commissioner Stebbins had a comment or at all that you wanted to make on that process?
No, I think you covered it,
Okay.
Director Day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that does bring us to our main item in this under this topic area, which is licensee Penn National Gaming's quarterly report. And Lance and George, there you are. Why don't you move right up to the microphones here? Lance, George, and Emo. Excuse me, I forgot to include Turner Construction. So. That's item 3B in your packet.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Nice to be here again today and talk to you about the progress we made in the past quarter as we put in our quarterly report to you. With me is Emil Giordano, Project Executive from Turner Construction, and Lance George, our Property General Manager. So I thought we'd just touch, you've had the report, I thought we'd just touch on some of the highlights and then certainly answer any questions you may have. But the third quarter has been a positive one for us. This particular report, we took the request from last time from you and put some photos in there, aerial photos, ground photos. I hope you found them useful. Project progress has been good for the quarter. We, as pointed out in Appendix 2, our schedule, the approved schedule from you remains on target for June 2015 opening. Design is complete in all areas, and all critical building-related permits are in hand to complete the work. In Appendix 4, we point out that the overall project budget remains at $225 million. It exceeds the required minimum spend, and to date, through 9/30, we have spent in cash $91.1 million on the project. We continue to work effectively with Mass Gaming, your staff, Pink, and working effectively on a variety of project matters. We're happy to report that we've made progress on the off-site roadway improvements. We've received the MEPA Section 61 findings and are pleased with the content of those. It meets all of our needs and those of the town of Plainville, from what I understand from them. We have made significant filings with MassDOT, their District 5, and the Federal Highway Administration on design and permitting matters. And based on meetings we've had with them in the last couple of weeks, we feel we should be in possession of a permit sometime in mid to later November. Adding all that up, we think we are in good shape to complete the off-site road work by the end of May 2015, which would tie in very nicely with our opening plans.
Is that done under contract to you?
It is.
It's okay.
It's funded as part of our development project. The work is contracted to Turner, and they have, and I should have pointed this out, they have issued the design, received bids, and this week we actually awarded the off-site roadway construction work.
Yeah, good.
You awarded that contract this
We
week?
did. Yeah, we awarded it to the same site contractor that's been doing all of the site work on the project, so it worked out very well.
Great.
So in the past month, we have made tremendous progress. I know we've reported to you struggles with the off-sites before, but
Right.
it's all come together very nicely.
Great.
Great.
And it feels like all the agencies, the public agencies have their shoulder to the wheel,
They sure do.
collaborating with you.
Yeah,
Great.
Yeah, we're very pleased right now.
Great.
Not just MassDOT, but the Federal Highway, tremendous cooperation. So, and we think all is on target now.
Great.
Great.
Just some other highlights. In appendix number 8, we point out some improvements we've made to the on-site construction workforce diversity. We're on or above our goals for minority and veterans. Still below goal on women, but we'll keep working at it. On appendix 9, and we've had occasion to talk about this in recent weeks, as of September 30th, we've made some tremendous progress on contracting with M, W, and VBE businesses. As of the end of September, our MBE direct construction contracting is at 14% versus a goal of 4%. WBE contracting is 17% against a goal of 7%. And VBE contracting is at 14% against a goal of 3%. As of September 30th, we've issued just under $57 million in direct construction subcontracts. $25 million, or 44% of that number, has been awarded to MW or VBE
That's great.
businesses. And also in Appendix 9, we point out that as of September 30th, of those $25 million in awards, $2.9 million of those have been paid for work completed to date. And those are the highlights as we saw them. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
On the building, Jack, you are on target to close the envelope and be ready for winter conditions?
We think so.
And progress smoothly, I hope?
We are.
Great.
Jack, looking at the remaining amount of the, I think it's Appendix 8, obviously there's still $133 million in remaining costs. How much of that has been already contracted or accounted for with identified vendors? Do you still see some opportunities for participation by MBEs, WBEs, and VBEs and some of the
On the
remaining
construction
spending?
side, we still have more to award. There's a lot of interior construction, drywall, and others that present some additional opportunities. So on the construction side, yes. There's also the fit-out and equipment, which is a whole separate exercise covered by a whole separate diversity plan. But, we'll put the same effort behind that one we've put on this one.
Okay. The last time you were here, you reported on a couple of categories for ventilation systems, which I think one was going to a VBE, another one, big chunk, was going to a WBE.
WBE, right.
Are those accounted for in these numbers
Yes.
someplace? Okay.
Yes.
And these are percents of dollars awarded, not percents of the eventual total,
It's percent of dollars, direct construction contracts awarded.
presently awarded, right?
So we've awarded about $57 million direct construction contracts. $25 million of that has been for VBE, MBE, or WBE enterprises.
Right. Great.
One of the big items is the gaming and operations equipment. What percentage of that $20 million price tag is gaming equipment as opposed to operational equipment? It's got to be the bigger chunk.
In this particular report, not too much of it. We are looking to finance slot machines separately
Okay.
So they are not shown as part of this. This would be more other food and beverage equipment, operations equipment, and those areas do present us some opportunities for MW and VBE that slot machines obviously don't.
Okay. All right, good. Thank you.
Well,
This is actually a point that we've made to you in the past, but any critical milestones going forward that depend on our role, now or later, we'd love to understand them to make sure we're not delaying you or being in the way, if you will. So
I don't see anything significant. I know there's issues out there about the central system, but not knowing the outcome of that, we're planning our construction processes as if it's going to happen.
right.
So that's one item. No, our focus now is just continuing site work, continuing to get the building closed, and to focus on the garage and the offices, so that's turned over in February.
Great.
But right now, I'm not, there's nothing from your side that's causing us
Troubling you.
any real critical problems.
Great.
great. Anybody else?
It's really a good report.
Yeah.
It's terrific to see this progress.
Right, and really appreciate the attention to the diversity efforts.
Right.
That's much,
pleasure. Thank you.
much noted. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Anything else from your report?
That's it for me. That brings it to our ombudsman and two licensed designee reports, Wynn and Jim. John.
Okay.
Thank you, Director Day. Mr. Chairman, as you know, we have monthly reports from our licensed designees. First up today will be MGM. I'm going to ask Mike Mathis and his team to come to the front of the room. Mike Mathis will introduce the rest of his team.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Commissioners, for allowing us to present today. I think this is our fourth monthly update following the award of the agreement for a license. And the theme for today is workforce development, and I think that's really appropriate. This, as you know, is a jobs bill more than anything else. And there's been a lot of conversation in the public about about jobs. We're really excited. As you know, we bring a tremendous amount of innovation to our project design, as well as our program. And I think we want to show today the innovation we bring to workforce development. Before I hand it off to my colleagues, I want to, I want to introduce a few people in the audience today. Bill Messner, president of Holyoke Community College. Bob Griffin, who's a director at HCC. Jeff Hayden, in charge of community development. As well as a couple of gentlemen that aren't here today. Two of our partners on the workforce development side are with STIC, and that is Bob LePage, who's part of the Massachusetts Casino Career Training Institute, as well as Ira Rubensall, who's the president. So with that, let me hand it off to Dave Cruz, who's been our partner on the Hamden Regional Employment Board side.
Great.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning, Commissioners. Wanted to take a few minutes this morning as part of our presentation to share some data with you that, as Mike said, we think are important to understand in relation to the excitement we have around the workforce needs in Hamden County, in particular in the host community of Springfield. And this data is taken from the American Community Survey in 2012, and I've got some updated figures that were just released this week that I think will be helpful as well. In 2012, in Hamden County, which has a population of approximately 460,000 residents, we had an unemployment rate of 11%. And if you look at the graphic, you'll see, particularly in that critical age of 25 to 44, that unemployment rate 2 years ago was 10.2%. And in the 45 to 54 range, you see it dropping significantly. But we think that 25 to 44 range is a particularly area where we are looking in terms of the workforce for the casino. I want to also share some information with you that was just released this week by the Massachusetts Office of Labor and Workforce Development, particularly with respect to the region and to the host community of Springfield. In Hampden County today, we have a workforce of approximately 224,000, and in that workforce employed are 206,000, which leaves approximately 18,000 individuals, or 8% of that labor force participation rate, that is still not attached to the workforce. And the unemployment rate, as you know, in the Commonwealth currently sits at 6.2%. In the host city in Springfield, in the month of September, we have a workforce participation of approximately 66,000 individuals, and of that number, 6,000 of them currently remain unemployed, which is a percentage of 10.2%. And again, a year ago, in September of 13, that rate was 11.1%. And for the first 9 months of this year, we've been fluctuating between 10.9% and last month's figure of 10.2%. We're stubbornly stuck in that 10.2 to 10.9 range. And again, I said across the state, the unemployment rate remains at 6.2%. And of the cities in the Commonwealth with the highest percentage of unemployment, again, Springfield ranks number 5. You have Lawrence, New Bedford, Fall River, Gosnold, and then Springfield. And right behind Springfield at 10%, again, is the city of Holyoke. Again, 2 of the critical gateway cities in Hampden County, core cities that are critical to the rebirth of this community. So I wanted to share that data with you a little bit, just to give you a little sense of where we stand right now this morning in that area. The second little graphic that I want to show you that I think is important is to take a look at the rich diversity that we have in Hampden County, and in particular in our 2 gateway cities, and in particular in the host community of Springfield. And you can see from the graphic that the population, again, in Hampden County is very, very rich, and particularly, as I said, in the 2 gateway cities in the host community. We have a very rich population in Hispanic and Latino, African American, Asian, and we think the diversity of that workforce and that labor force is going to be critical, again, to the work that we're looking at doing going forward. And the third and the last graphic that I want to share with you, again, is a little bit about the educational attainment levels here in the area. And you can again see in the gateway cities of Springfield and Holyoke, we have a high school graduation rate in June of 2013 of between 54 and 52%. We have a long way to go to catch up, not only with the county as a whole, but with the state in general. And that's something we're working very, very hard at. You can also see the number of residents aged 25 and over without a high school diploma during the time period of 2008 to 2012. And that, again, that figure is stubbornly stuck in those areas. And we're working hard to try to figure out ways to respond to that. And also see the small percentage of individuals with a bachelor's degree. And that ranges, again, for a little bit below 20%, roughly 18 and 19% of the residents of Hampden County, in particular of the 2 largest cities, Springfield in particular, again, stubbornly stuck in that area. And you look at the number of young people, again, ages in 16 to 19, struggling to be attached to the workforce, and those numbers are significant. So I wanted to just share a little bit of this data with you. My colleague Laura Lee, that I'm going to introduce in a minute, will talk a little bit more in detail about that. But I wanted to just share that data with you just as a lead-in, again, to our presentation. So let me introduce Laura Lee, who's the Vice President of Regional Operations for MGM Resorts International.
David, I have a quick question.
Sure, Bruce.
Around the unemployment figures, there's obviously the national story of the unemployment rates are not accurately reflecting the real unemployment rate. One of the other key pieces of the legislation was talking about the underemployed.
Right.
How do you distinguish out the underemployed in these numbers, or can you?
Yeah, I think the data that we have here does not really call out or pull out the number of underemployed, but I can tell you from the work that we do at the Regional Employment Board of Hampden County, there's a significant amount of young folks, and folks in general, that are in what we describe as the marginal labor market, They may be working part-time, they even may be working full-time at wages just above minimum wage, hardly enough to sustain a family. But there's a huge pool of underemployed individuals. We see them all the time at our 2 career centers. They're a significant part of the population that we serve in both of those centers. And even though they're not counted in that data, if they were counted in that data, those numbers would be skewed even higher.
Thanks.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
One thing I wanted to start off with is kind of telling you a little bit about my career history. Yeah. We're an entertainment company. If we can't make you chuckle, right, then we haven't done our job.
Your whole team's already chuckling. I can't wait to hear this story.
I actually opened the Mirage back in 1989 as a VIP services attendant, which is along the lines of a front desk clerk. With that, I worked my way up, opening up Treasure Island and Human Resources, decided I want to get back to my passion. And for purposes of this meeting, I actually went back and counted that since 1989, up until my most recent position of Senior Vice President, I've been promoted 10 times within MGM Resorts within 25 years. So that's just a little bit about me. And I know that you've had the opportunity to meet Kelly in Kentucky, and she's had a similar background as well. And again, I just want to reiterate that we are committed to providing a diverse workforce for MGM Springfield. Next slide. We just wanted to bring to everyone's attention a little bit about our career opportunities timeline. We believe that we'll have construction up and going on Q2 of 2015 with about approximately 1,000 construction workers. Our peak will be Q2 of 2016, Q3 with over 2,000, or approximately 2,000 construction workers. And as we're winding down construction and beginning to gear up for operations of the hotel, we'll begin our hiring approximately 5 to 6 months prior to the opening of MGM Springfield. And we just have some data here showing, well, obviously we'll have a smaller team on board between now and 6 months out, but we'll start hiring 200, ramping up about 2 months out where we will employ or hire 1,140 and then have our 3,000 right around opening. And again, as stated, we're committed to hiring 35% from the Springfield area and 90% from the Western Massachusetts area. And this is just a high-level overview of the areas we would be looking to hire, such as casino, food and beverage are 2 of the largest, and then general and administrative, that's usually your back-of-house, finance, HR, warehouse, those sorts of positions. And as Dave pointed out, these are the demographics for the MGM workforce profile. We are a majority minority company and about almost 50-50 male, female, and we feel that Western Massachusetts, they fit in well with our diversity goals and commitment. At MGM Resorts, we have a people philosophy that we are committed to engaging, investing in, and inspiring our employees each and every day. And I'm going to spend a few moments now just to let you know how we're committed to do the same with the potential applicants for MGM Springfield. I'm not going to go through our entire mass hiring plan. This slide, I just want to point out that we've already started our workforce development, meeting with our partners at Stick, Holyoke, working with Mr. Cruz to begin developing our workforce development plan. The next slide will show, and I think it's important, is that we don't see workforce development ending when MGM Springfield opens. We feel it will continue. We will continue to work with our partners so that our employees have the ability to continue uplifting their education, perhaps looking at different promotional opportunities if they're interested.
Excuse me, Laura, what is mass orientation at the bottom of that slide?
Typically, when you're opening a property, you do large orientations in your convention area, so there might be 300 or 400 attendees, and we have a variety of sessions, and we orient them to MGM Springfield.
So mass means lots, not
Lots,
Massachusetts.
yes. Not Massachusetts.
Yeah.
That continues to be an issue, by the way. In our internal documents, we continue to use mass in that context, and it's creating a little bit of confusion, so we got to come up with a synonym for
Yeah.
that.
What's the reference to mother hen?
Yes, they're laughing in the back. What we like to do is we may hire someone 9 months out, and we won't start them until maybe 4 months out, 3 months out. So we like to stay in contact with them. So we'll send them notes, send them letters, emails saying, you know, we're excited that you're starting. Can't wait for you to begin with MGM Springfield. So just keeping them engaged and interested in the project.
Laura, on the previous slide, you talked about, fill us in a little bit more on the launch, the onboarding website.
Yes. What we will end up doing, our system now is when you start with the company, we send you a link and that you'll be able to do your pre-employment paperwork on that, such as some of your I-9 paperwork, emergency contact, all of that. So when you come in, we already have a lot of that done. And now I'd like to just take a few minutes to walk through the different steps of our kind of workforce development plan. So how will we engage? Like I stated before, we've already begun working with our various community partners, nonprofit organizations, faith-based organizations, and we plan to continue that relationship beyond the opening of the property. We'll work through the traditional channels of workforce development as well as look for new ways to uplift and educate the region. A good example is we will start a Boots to Business program. That'll be an ongoing program, but prior to MGM Springfield, we will work to hire 9 to 10 veterans, have them come out to Las Vegas approximately 9 months to a year prior to opening. They may be, say, in casino, learn how operations works within MGM Resorts, and then their commitment is they'll go back to MGM Springfield in a supervisory role. And resources, if you hit it again. This is just a short list of all of our partners, and we continue to meet and grow that list of partners. I think on your printout it didn't turn out. And what's important is community outreach. We will have your traditional, website, a career center where applicants can call in, ask questions. But I think, when Dave talks to some of the unemployment rates, underemployed, and then, there's those that we aren't even reported because they've just given up. That transportation becomes difficult for many of these residents, and we don't necessarily have the expectation that they're all going to drive to our career center. So one of our goals is to do a lot of community outreach. Once we have our construction plan, go out to church meetings, organizational meetings, and so forth, and talk to them about how they can begin developing if they have a certain career that they'd like, or we're hiring for construction, here's the process if you're interested. And we will also have job readiness sessions once we get a little closer to opening, where we'll go out into the community, and the HR team will do how to interview, how to write a resume, just those basic skills that a lot of times are lacking, so that they are ready once they interview at MGM Springfield. They're already ahead of the game, how to dress, that sort of thing. And we will invest in our employees, and I'd like to take a moment now to introduce the two gentlemen to the right. They are with a company that we've contracted with called SkillSmart. We found SkillSmart and utilized them up in National Harbor, our project there, during a recent career showcase that we had about 3 months ago. And last week, we also utilized them at the MGM Springfield Career Showcase. I have Mike Knapp seated right next to me. He's the CEO of SkillSmart and also a former president of the County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland. Next to him is Jason Green. He's the vice president of business development. And he was also Associate White House Counsel to President Obama. And through their public careers, they'd worked together, and once they entered the private sector, they realized the importance of aligning both public and the private sectors to create a stronger workforce in the communities in which we work and live. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mike.
Thank you, Laura. Good morning, Commissioners.
Morning.
Pleasure to be with you. When Jason and I left our previous jobs, we'd had a lot of conversations about challenges that were out there, and one that really struck us was, or continued to strike us, was the types of reports that we'd see where the number of companies that were out there that were seeking employees, and yet the stubborn unemployment rates that continued to persist. And as we did a lot of research, we recognized that the skills gap, that gap between the skills employers are looking for and the skills that employees or job seekers tend to possess is real and very tangible. And so we, knowing that, we really started to explore the different types of things that we could do to better align the employer, the job seeker, and education providers. And so we recognized that if we could pull together a platform that could identify, help employers to better identify the skills that they're looking for and increase that level of transparency, then it would also allow job seekers the ability to better identify the skills that they possess. And also think about where they may have acquired those skills. We tend to think about skills coming from going to high school, going to college, and that's how we're prepared for the workforce. And yet oftentimes we acquire skills in many different places, whether it's working in our church group and volunteering, heading up Boy Scouts, coaching, learning through classroom activities, or through the job. And so we wanted to make sure that we could help those employees or job seekers more holistically present the skills that they've acquired over the lifetime of activities that they've undertaken. And so that really became the genesis for what we put together with SkillSmart, because if we could do those two pieces, then we would also give the education providers a better sense of the types of things that they needed to help their students acquire to be able to be effective in the workforce. And so with that, we'd identified the mission to really begin to transform lives by connecting those elements. So as Elora had indicated, we worked last week with them. We worked previously in National Harbor. We worked last week at the showcase in Springfield, and here are a couple pictures of folks that were actually inputting their information into our computers. What typically happened last week was there was about a 20-minute orientation, and then each of the individuals was allowed to basically walk through the Hall of Fame and get familiarized with the types of positions and talk to MGM employees and how they did their jobs and what those jobs entailed. And then they would come over to talk to us, and we would then put them with the computer, and they would begin to go through the platform and identify just some basic background information about themselves, and of the jobs that were there, the types of ones that generated their interest and where they may have had some experience. And you can see on the slide in front of you that here's kind of the top 5 positions that presented themselves. And there were 507 people who registered. We had 484 of them actually get to a computer and give us and provide their information. So the high levels of interest were front desk clerk, special events rep, attendant for front services, security officer, and surveillance operators. And so it gives a sense of just where people think their skills match up, or just where their areas of interest are. And you can see the levels of those who identified that they have experience in those 5 areas. What I want to do, though, is to give you a sense of what were they looking at as they were sitting at the computer. And what we have is a platform that, as I indicated, allows the job seeker to identify the skills that they've acquired. And they build out a profile identifying those activities, how they got the skills, how they've used them. And then we have the employer identify the skills they have associated with each position. Once we have those in, then the job seeker can then run a search against the database and see where their skills match up against the jobs that are in that database. And in the example you see in front of you, this individual scored very well on a scale of 0 to 100 and the utility porter and custodian positions, and so that they know that that's something that they're well suited for and may want to apply for. But perhaps they really want to be a poker dealer. And if you look here, clearly their skill requires some more building. And so in that instance, we allow them to then click on that position. It gets them, identifies the prerequisites, the job description, and the various skills associated with that position. And then they can see where they have strengths and where they have areas where they're going to need further opportunity for growth. And so, for example, in this instance, mathematics is where this particular individual needs some more assistance. So we highlight that, they click on the Improve My Skills, and what it takes them to is the information or the activity within their community that will allow them to acquire that skill. In this instance, it's a math course at Stick. It could well be a math course at any other community colleges or any other training providers that could provide the level of information or skills that are required to be successful in some of the things that MGM is looking for. And so this becomes a real platform that you can bring lots of your community partners in and make sure that they can participate in helping to train up the local workforce. And it's not just necessarily locally, but could also tie into the Commonwealth's Career 101 program through the one-stop shops or one-stop centers and use it that way as well. So that gives you a sense of how.
Excuse me,
Certainly.
can people access this at times other than your job fairs? I mean, is it something that you can access remotely?
Yes, and that's the point. Is so this would be available to the community to be able to access at any time. So they could do it remotely if they're home. They could also work with, if they're working with a community service provider, or social service provider, they may have terminals or computers there. So we could even do, and Laura will reference this in a little bit, but even a train the trainer program where we could help bring people up to speed so that they could actually help individuals work their way through and build their profiles. And so it's not just come to a job fair or job showcase and participate in it, but you could access it throughout the community.
Right.
You know,
So you'll be, go ahead, excuse me.
You know, Mr. Chairman, if I could just talk about why we're so excited about this tool. In this day and age of mobility, mobile devices, I think the power of this tool is that, for example, when we have new job postings, we can send an alert to any applicant who signed up through this program to let them know that that position is now available. And as we backload those positions, working with HCC, working with STIC, working with the new Career Training Institute, we're able to, we can post new training programs. So I think the power of this tool, it takes us out of the old days of submitting a resume and being told that you're not qualified, and that being the end of the conversation until someone looks at another classified ad. And this is a really powerful tool, and we're really excited about it, and you'll see some more of the functionality of it.
That's great. The key, obviously, is making sure people know it's there, you know, is promoting it enough, having it branded somehow or other, and having it out there enough that people know about it.
And if I may, I was going to address this after, but our long-term goal, and we've already been talking with our community partners, even places such as the Puerto Rican Cultural Center, already hit Mike up for pre-opening budget, that if they need a computer, they will get a computer, and then Mike and Jason, their team, would come and train them so that it's accessible at all of these, either nonprofit, community partners, and so forth. So when they're working with their candidates, that they'll be able just to help them right there as well. So it'll be very accessible in the community.
That's great.
So just walking through a little bit more of the information that we gleaned from the showcase from last week. So in addition to that information that individuals have identified in positions that they're interested in, you can also go back through and see where they may or may not be as interested but have levels of experience. So it gives you a sense of the type of foundational skills that the people in the community may have that you can build on, or gives the information back to MGM to think about positions that may be similar to where people have skills but may not be exactly what people have identified, and so that you can steer people in the right direction and round out their training so that they're better suited for other positions within the organization. We saw, here's the demographic, or the educational demographics that we found from the group that attended last week. Actually, it was a very educated population that came in. 26% were high school graduates. 22% had a bachelor's degree, 28% had some college, and even 10% had master's degrees, which is interesting because that tends to run a little bit counter to the data that was presented earlier, and that can present us a couple different things. That maybe what we're seeing is an overrepresentation of certain populations, or perhaps even people are overstating what they may have in a very generic way because they think that that's what they need to show that they're qualified for positions. And it provides an opportunity to educate the community that you don't necessarily need to do that, because we're going to show you the pathway to get the skills that you need for the positions within the MGM community.
Yeah, if I can, I want to pause on that for a moment, because I think the data is critical, and just this first phase and some of the things we're learning based on a sample of 490, I think is pretty telling. By the way, that tiny little slice that doesn't have an identifier, I filled it out. Jason Green filled it out, and it turned out there were 2 individuals with JDs that were interested in positions. So we thought that was a bad sample, and we took that out. But if you look at this pie chart, what it would tell you is under the Some High School that we've got a very highly educated applicant group, and that GED education, for example, isn't quite a priority. That's not the case. You saw David Cruz's presentation, and we've got a 55% high school graduation rate, a 45% high school dropout rate. And we don't believe we'll be successful unless we bring that group of individuals, many of which are Springfield residents, into the workforce. And what we did is when I looked at that data, I questioned it, and I reached out to some of our community partners that brought applicants to that job fair. We know of at least 150 or so applicants that are immigrant workers, immigrant folks that have not entered into a GED program because they haven't been aware of it, or they're in a queue for a GED program. And for whatever reason, they didn't indicate that in this response, and I think it's because they thought they needed to over-represent their qualifications in order to get into our system. And the takeaway for me and our team is we need to go out to that population the next round and tell them that's not a liability in terms of being an attractive candidate. That's actually an asset. And that's something that we want to do and work with your folks on. So a lot of takeaways, and that's an important one for us. And we'll continue to monitor these metrics and modify our strategy and our program there.
That's really great. I mean, I really appreciate you're looking through the numbers and, A, and trying to really understand what's out there, but B, remembering who the hard-to-employ audience is, and that was a legislative mandate. So that's really going the extra mile to try to make that happen, which is great. Jill, I hope you're hearing some of these hints. You know, these are really good.
Go ahead, Mike.
So here's just the employment status of those people who showed up last week. 43% employed, 41% of out of work and looking. So clearly reflective of what we're seeing in the community and gives us a good cross-section of who we need to make sure we're reaching out to. And then
What was the residents makeup of that 400?
That's coming.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
No, that's all right.
nice job. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. And our final slide really begins to show where people are coming from. And so you can see that clearly coming from Springfield, from Holyoke, although interestingly, and you couldn't get it all on one screen, people came from as far as Boston. We had 4 or 5 people that came from this community to come out and visit the job showcase in Springfield. And so you're seeing, the nice thing about this is you get to see how the outreach has worked. If there have been specific marketing campaigns or outreach activities with specific groups, you can see did that work? Did we get the yield from those particular communities? And if so, great. We know that that's working. And if we didn't, and we saw a community that's underrepresented, then we know we've got to begin to do a lot more work in those communities to make sure people know to participate, or to identify other partners within those communities to make sure that we're helping them reach their local populations. And so it gives a good sense. And you can also split it up in different pieces and begin to look at the populations and who's coming from where and which skills they possess. So it's just a matter of how you want to begin to slice the data.
Is this zip code based?
Yes.
How it's possible?
And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Laura to...
Great. And just one thing, I think Mike did talk about it, but there's a lot of skills that are transferable skills. And just because, you had one job, you may have skills that allow you to do another job. And that's what's great about this program, and what we like is it allows us to work with those candidates. And, retail cashier, okay, you don't want to be a retail cashier anymore, but you want to be front desk. Great, you have these transferable skills, and you can learn how to work and manage the front desk. And then the next slide. So this is just really our high-level plan to get the community ready for our positions. One thing I wanted to address is our overarching mission is to allow smaller companies to utilize the tool without charge to backfill their positions. We plan to go back to the Greater Springfield Chamber and other regional chambers and allow them to list their positions, perhaps for a year. We're still working out those details because, we know that there's a lot of small businesses in the Springfield area, and we wouldn't want to take the best food server, maybe from the pizza place, and have them work at Springfield and have that small employer hurt. So that way they'll be able to draw from these sources as well. Additionally, we feel, this kind of complements what Massachusetts has put in place, where we will put in there if they need the Careers 101 course and push them to that, and then they can, after they do their remediation, denote that in the system. And then also at the end, perhaps they aren't selected at MGM Springfield or one of the smaller companies, we will push them to, JobQuest and the one-stops and say, well, although there's you didn't get accepted here, there are other opportunities within the area.
This, I want to stop for a minute because this is key and a tremendous asset for the region. I think all of us agree that the job opportunities is kind of a huge hook. It's a marketing draw for people to step out and say, I want to pursue a career, but for those who the skills don't match up with, this is a fantastic way to use that information coming in and directing them off to other careers and services and opportunity. I know it's something that the community college folks have been talking about since the early days of the commission, so it's great that you're making this tool available out to the rest of the region.
Thank you. And we like it because it allows us to be proactive as well. And really, we're getting towards the end, and you've heard me, talk about my background, Kelly's background, but I have a message from one of our employees, Gabby, who's the Director of Food and Beverage at New York Resort and Casino, and she'd like to tell you a little bit about the opportunities MGM Resorts has given her. Oops.
Good thing we have the closed caption.
Job is very exciting because we get to create menus, we get to create experiences for our guests, and we get to take care of our employees as well. Well, food and beverage is a 24-hour operation, so it is important to make sure that you're there different times of the day, different days of the week, to make sure that you have that presence and that face-to-face interaction with your graveyard shift, your swing shift. At New York, we have several recognition programs in place for our food and beverage department. One of them is the Food and Beverage Ambassador, which is a little heart that we give away every time we notice someone doing the right thing. We also have a birthday recognition program, so we want to be a little bit more personal with it. It really touches them, and we've been doing this for 2 years now, and it still surprises people. When I first joined MGM Grand, I was the director of stewarding, and within a year, I moved back to the front of the house, covering the position of general manager of high volume outlets. Within the next year and a half, I got a second opportunity to move to New York as a director of food and beverage. I believe this company really has a true commitment to make sure that you move forward in your career. They can see that you're self-motivated. They provide you with all the tools that you need to succeed. We have so many properties, always hiring for new positions, and we try to promote within, which is a great thing. So once you become part of the family, it's so much easier to take advantage of all these opportunities and make sure you raise your hand and say, I'm ready.
If I can make some closing comments, especially for our friends from Western Mass who trekked out this morning to be part of this, and this is particularly for Bill Messner, president of HCC, but also for David as well and the rest of our group. When it comes to employment, we recognize that the goal of the Gaming Act is not only jobs, but quality jobs, and we believe net job growth. So the power of this tool is to make sure that we can identify real time what kind of applicants we're getting. You saw a pie chart that talked about employed, unemployed. That's something I asked Mike and Jason to build into their profile because we didn't want to just get employed applicants who were trying to get a better job. That's important. But we also wanted to make sure that we were getting unemployed folks that were going to be entering the market. At the same time, we're launching this product across the whole corporation, and I think something that Laura touched on is we want to make this product available to small businesses that wouldn't be able to invest in a product like this. So why are we starting 18 to 24 months earlier than we're going to make our first hires is because we're going to reach out to the small businesses, and as we get applicants who would be a great fit, but maybe would be a great fit with a little bit of training and on the job training, we can kick those individuals off to some of the small businesses that are also looking for positions and backfill positions along with MGM Springfield. So it's a wonderful tool, incredibly excited about it, and I think it'll allow us to achieve our goals. We have goals to our surrounding communities to make sure that the jobs are come from all around the communities. We have goals related to ethnicity, employed, unemployed, and this is a tool that allows us to manage those expectations and achieve those results. Last thing I'll say to you is the impact of what we're trying to do collectively, meaning the commission and our project, really came home to me last week at our career showcase. We had 500 individuals show up. Many of them had been unemployed for 5 months, a year, 2 years. They recognized that these positions wouldn't be available for 18 months to 24 months, but they were there because they desperately want these opportunities. So it's incredibly rewarding, and I think we should collectively be proud about what we're trying to do here.
That's great stuff, Mike. One of the, who's actually, this is a complicated, data-driven, you need a lot of input, a lot of training to make this thing work. It's great, it's very exciting. But who actually will be running it on a day-to-day basis? Who's responsible for making sure that the data is really up to date, that you're doing the outreach to the small businesses, that the small businesses know what they're doing, that whole bit?
Yeah, I think Laura and I can tag team that response. We're in a delicate spot because we haven't finalized our contract with SkillSmart, so I think we're in trouble. But
They're pro bono.
Sorry, we talked about how great they were.
there's a bunch of corporate lawyers back in Las Vegas that are going to kill us about this presentation. But no, we're going to be.
Close the deal right here.
That's right.
Keep talking, though. We really like this.
Let me hand it off to Laura about how next steps and how we're going to roll this out.
Thank you. Yeah, we will actually have a Director of Workforce Development on the MGM Springfield team. That'll be one of their key jobs. Our next steps are to circle back with the community college, all the different nonprofit organizations, and really dive into their curriculums, looking at our job descriptions and putting together that match. What we showed you at STIC was just a kind of a quick example of how it'll work. So we plan to do that the next maybe 3 to 5 months. Then we feel that we'll be ready to go out and do our community outreach. But as I stated, it'll be an ongoing position, and so that person will continue to work with SkillSmart, getting the data uploaded, working with the community, keeping updated as to what new classes, or if we have a skills gap, we'll be able to go out to STIC or Holyoke and say, we really need help with this. Do you think you could create a curriculum for us?
Could I just reinforce this, Commissioner, that you all have certainly indicated a seriousness about this, which we note and appreciate. But just to reiterate, I mean, this is one of those things, it's like a great website. You design a fabulous website, and every day that goes by, it's less good because you don't keep it up to date. And so having the commitment to put the bodies behind this so it can really do what it's meant to do is obviously really crucial.
We're making that commitment today.
Yeah, okay.
We're not clear about that, but we're making that.
Yeah, I don't doubt that.
I just wanted to add as a reminder, as you look down the rest of our agenda, and certainly don't expect you to stick around through this afternoon, but go back and watch this webcast, because we have some folks coming in to talk about the diversity and the construction side of things, and getting some helpful ideas, suggestions, best practices of encouraging more minorities and women to enter the construction workforce. And I know Dave Wallace from Labor and Workforce Development is here because he's focused on the apprentice need, which we've talked about in the past as a great way to encourage more minorities and women and veterans to get into the workforce on the construction side. And it's a different issue depending on where you are in Massachusetts. I know the Springfield project is going to have unique challenges, probably different than the project in Everett, but keep focused on that goal as well. But this is encouraging.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment. I met Dave earlier with Jill and somebody that we want to talk to. I think, sometimes I think it seems counterintuitive that we're so focused on workforce development, which are the operational jobs in 3 years, and don't spend as much time with you on the construction side. Part of the reason for that is we're tying that to the selection of our general contractor. So those conversations are ongoing, but they're obviously a critical player in that conversation. We will come back to you once that selection is made. We expect to make it in the next 2 to 3 months. And we'll roll out the same type of program to ensure to you that we're going to achieve the same type of goals that we're doing on the workforce development side. So very focused on it and understand the importance of making sure that, similar to the permanent jobs, that we have local residents getting construction jobs and not just pulling it from the east, which is probably the easier way to do it. So we'll be back to you.
It's good to hear. Thanks, Matt.
I just wanted to say we're constantly prodding and pushing, and that's our job. But this is a good tool. It's an excellent tool. But the philosophy in back of its use, I think, is really commendable. The idea we're going to use this not only to, and here is why the lead time, that we're going to train people, identify their skills, identify their aspirations, help them get the training, move them into the positions in a company that's demonstrated its ability to promote from within, and continue to do that, and at the same time, use this same tool to backfill the jobs that are coming out of other places. This is a win-win deal for everybody, and it once again is, for me at least, as one commissioner, demonstrating the commitment that you have not only to meeting our expectations, but in many cases to exceed them. I sound like a cheerleader all the time, but there's a lot to cheer about here. And I think this is really a remarkable commitment to the basic and fundamental goals of the statute, and I'm delighted to see this presentation here today as one commissioner.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I also think it looks like a fabulous tool. Really getting people the skills and having them identify what they need and where they can go to get it, which is even a bigger issue. So you've been doing this for about 2 years?
Yeah.
And so are there already some lessons learned for some places that you've started to use this program?
Yes. I mean, and the thing we're finding is that every time we do it someplace else, there are more lessons to be learned.
Mm-hmm.
And so so it covers the gamut. One of the nice things, and I think to your comments, commissioners, about MGM. MGM is one of the organizations that we've discovered that has a better handle on the skills required for its employees than other organizations. We've talked to many other large companies with names that you would all recognize who we've approached and said, what do you think about deploying this kind of a strategy? And they have struggled because they've recognized that they don't necessarily know the skills that they have internal to their current employees. And so that's one of the things that so I just want to recognize that MGM, I think, is forward-thinking, not just in commitment to the community, but also in their workforce in general. We're learning that the nice thing about our platform is that it can be deployed in partnership with a lot of people. We've also found a couple of our early conversations were such that people see this as a competitive element, and really it's a way to bring together the employer, the job seeker, and the community service provider, education provider, in a way that people can connect that they can't currently in really any other platform. And it's hard, to your point, Mr. Chairman, as it relates to kind of engaging and making sure the tool is updated. One of the things we wanted to create was a dynamic platform, because we've recognized in talking to other people that if you do it once and everyone inputs all of the data and it goes away or it hasn't been updated, within a month it's out of date and it isn't a useful tool. And so our platform is a dynamic platform, so as new positions come in, it identifies additional skills that may not have already been put into the system, so you can flag that. And so the education providers can see, wait a minute, they're requiring an additional capacity that wasn't there before. We need to make sure our curriculum now reflects that, and so that we can continue to have that be something that is relevant throughout the time that it's being used, because you're right, if it's never updated, then it goes away, and despite what all of the best intentions may be. And we've also found that community providers can really leverage this to identify job seekers who may require additional efforts, transportation, childcare, that they can help track those job seekers through this kind of a platform and see when they're having challenges or where some of the difficulties may be, and really provide those extra support services so they can see the progress that their community members may be having or not making, and be able to make sure that the flag goes up and ask the questions. And so we learn a lot with kind of every new deployment, but we're very excited about this because it's a much more holistic approach, because it can take place within an entire community than we've seen in most of the other places we've worked.
And I'll just make one more final comment, because we really are all in this together. For Bob DeSalvio, we don't have these guys under an exclusivity, so I'd be happy to share some of the upfront costs if they'd be interested in joining. But no, we're really excited. We really appreciate the comments, and I think Massachusetts has raised the bar with the Gaming Act and what you've asked of us, and we continue to meet it and exceed it, and it's driving innovation within our own company. So I thank you for the high standard that you've raised throughout this process, and very proud to continue to deliver on that.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Yeah, we're going to take a quick break and come back for our next report. We are ready to reconvene, meeting 137, and I think we will go right back to Ombudsman Ziemba. We are going to change the schedule a little bit. We're running ahead of schedule, and when we finish with Ombudsman Ziemba, we're going to move to the research and problem gambling agenda item and have lunch after that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Today, we're joined by WinMass LLC for the first report since being designated as designated licensee, a little over a month today. We're joined by Robert DeSalvio, Senior Vice President of Development for WIN, and Jackie Crum, Senior Vice President and General Counsel for WIN. Thank you, Bob and Jack.
Thanks, John, and good morning, Commissioners.
Morning.
And great to have Jackie here with me again from Las Vegas. And we're very happy, really, to present our first update. I would say that the key theme of the update is significant amount of outreach work that we've been doing since we last spoke with you folks. The first topic that we wanted to cover is in the building and site design front. You know, the Commission had asked that we reconsider looking at the actual design of the hotel tower in particular. And I can tell you that serious work is being done on that front. I was in Las Vegas for the last couple weeks working alongside with Mr. Wynn and the architecture and interior design team, and they have some terrific ideas that we'll be prepared to show you in a little bit. They want to conclude the work that they've been working on, and quite honestly, it's not just the hotel tower. Mr. Wynn really takes very seriously the entire arrival sequence and what the guests see as they enter the property. And for those of you that might have been at G2E or heard his keynote address, he spent some time, quite a bit of time, talking about the Massachusetts project and the work that he's done already in terms of making this a very spectacular entry sequence and trying to make sure every aspect of that building is planned out in a way that'll be very well presented. So that work is underway. We took your direction seriously, and we're looking forward to present that at a later date. The next item that we've been working on very extensively is the preparation of the final environmental report, what's known as the SFEIR. That is a document that required us to take a look at some of the, mainly just the transportation aspects of our program and get back with DCR, with DOT, with the communities that surround us and make sure that we've covered all of our bases as it relates to transportation. I will tell you that work is going on very aggressively. Our team is meeting with the DOT and others at least a couple times a week. So this is an extremely active process. I can tell you also that it's going very well. And without going into all details, I'll just give you a couple examples. We're looking at in the Phase 1 Sullivan Square, the DOT had some great suggestions about one of the intersections. It was one that we had not re-signalized. We talked about some realignments of the sidewalks and the curbing to provide better pedestrian access. And so each of the meetings goes through in sort of painstaking detail, making sure that we've got the right plans in place. So that work is going well. We've been doing some work on Santilli Circle. That's where we have a very large piece of mitigation with a new flyover bridge. We got some excellent feedback from DOT and some of the engineers about making that transition go smoother. It's a very important intersection for those that might arrive from the north at our property. So those are the kinds of examples of things that we do really a good couple times a week, and that process is moving along very well. We also are working with the MBTA. I know that you're fully aware that we had started the procurement process with the MBTA for an important parcel that helps us provide a service road access around the rear of their property. We recently did some survey work, and good news, we found out there had been some questions about a right-of-way issue back with the tracks, and after going through last week the survey work and in a meeting just yesterday with the MBTA, we realized we don't need that property as part of it, so that sort of takes one complication in that particular transaction off the table completely. So right now, the main focus is our team working with the MBTA and their operations team to make sure that we can get done what we need to get done, but also recognizing the importance of that MBTA facility and making sure that their operations can go on just as smoothly. So again, very strong progress, and meeting again, I think there's a meeting this afternoon again with the MBTA and our team. So again, good news there, and we're progressing very well for all the items related for the SFEIR.
Bob, can I ask you, but you're still considering the alternative or the second entrance for the service?
Yes, we are. And so we started that procurement process, and then in the document, we had actually mentioned that it was subject to some final review of the property lines and what exactly we needed and the ops team at MBTA. So right now, we're just kind of cleaning up the design, and that's the ongoing meetings. But yes, we do want to have that secondary access point. Next item on our construction manager, I think the commission is well aware that we've been working with Gilbane on the pre-construction mode, and now Jackie and the Wind Design Development team in Las Vegas are currently working on converting that pre-construction into more of a formalized arrangement. So while that has not been concluded, certainly our teams are negotiating back and forth, and we're going to continue working on that progress, and hopefully we'll have a solution relatively soon in terms of a final determination on construction manager. But Gilbane has been a terrific partner of ours all the way through. And as you'll see later in my presentation, they've been working with us on our outreach sessions as well. Next item I want to talk about is also very important on our list, and that is our remediation effort. We are currently in the process of doing on-site soil characterization, and that's really a fancy term to describe going in and looking at the soil, seeing what's in there so that we can do the final preparation of our Phase 4 report. In the DEP chain, that Phase 4 is really the last of the big steps before you can actively begin remediation, and it's obviously very important to know what we've got out there. So that work is ongoing now, and we're looking like that by the end of the year we should be able to complete the Phase 4 process with the DEP, and our current schedule calls for on-site remediation to begin the first quarter of next year. So all good news on that front. And as a follow-up to that, there's a lot of public interest in the remediation part of our particular project. We've had a great relationship with Tufts University. That started out with the Environmental Services Department, but is now sort of spread throughout the rest of Tufts, and economics classes and other groups are now very interested in not only the remediation work, but what does this mean longer term for the Mystic River and overall development up and down the Mystic. So we've had a great relationship with the Mystic River Watershed Association, and then we're going to be doing a presentation October 28 at Tufts. And that'll be along with the university and Jamie Fay, who works with us at Fort Point, and myself, and we'll be talking to some of the students and other folks that join us for the session. But it's something that's important to us since so many people are interested in the remediation part, that we want to make sure that we're out there actively talking about it, and those sessions are available. In this particular case, it's open to the general public.
So who's sponsoring it at Tufts? Or who?
Tufts, along with ourselves and the Mystic River Watershed Association.
Great.
So October 28th, 7 p.m., and Tufts University in Medford.
There's a tremendous resource of graduate students who are in, you're nodding, okay, good, you know, who are.
Yes, there
We
are.
have spoken to them about
Okay,
that.
great, to
That's
do
great.
all
It's
kinds
been a
of-
great relationship so far, and it's a very important topic and one that we want to make sure
Great.
is out there and available for the public to hear about. The next item I want to talk about are the vendor and career information sessions. What happened after the award of the license or the designation of the award, our phones really were ringing off the hook. Everyone wanting to know, how could I sign up, potentially be a future team member at Wynn, how could I be a vendor or get involved with the project. So we immediately began planning these sessions so we could get the word out. And it's so far, it's been going very well. On the next slide, you'll see that we've lined up 6 of the sessions. We've had 3 already and 3 more to go. Monday, we were in Malden at Jackson Suite. Tuesday, we were in Cambridge at the Marriott. Last night, we were in Everett. Tonight, we're going to be in Charlestown. Next week, we're in Chelsea. And we wanted to do one in the North Shore. So we're going to do one at North Shore Community College on the 30th. These are a combination of both folks that are interested in potentially being new employees down the road, but also those that may want to get involved in the construction side of the business as well. And Gilbane's been there. We've had representatives from the Massachusetts Gaming Commission there, both Jill Griffin, who's been terrific, David Acosta, to talk about both the employment and the vendor process for registration. We've also had representatives, Bob LePage from the Community College Group and the Casino Career Institute. They're talking about training programs and how people can get involved in the industry through either the Community College Network or eventually through the new dealer schools. The building trades have been representative. Brian Doherty, the head of the Building Trades Council, has been in attendance at some of the sessions. We've had great response from the carpenters. The carpenters are making available at those sessions opportunities for apprenticeships. And what we've heard from the carpenters is whenever large-scale projects like this get announced, they get a significant uptick in the amount of people that may want to get involved in the construction trades, and that opens up opportunities for the unions to really use their very strong apprenticeship programs. So that particular breakout session has been very active as well, so it's good to see, and we've been getting tremendous support from the building trades. And of course, Gilbane has been there along with their partner Janie. Janie is the group that works with Gilbane on making sure that veterans, women, and minorities will get involved in these jobs. And most importantly is we're looking at trying to break up the packages into many more than would typically be done in a job. We're looking at upwards of 150 different bid packages. And if you break them up into smaller pieces, normally that will provide more opportunities, especially for some of the folks that don't normally get to participate. So that's been very well received, and they're getting a lot of interest. And even though these sessions are not really job fairs for us yet, because really, as Mike mentioned earlier, it's a little early for somebody to be signing up for jobs that are 2 and 3 years down the road, but it's not at all early for those that want to get involved in the construction trades. So in a sense, these are really a little bit of construction job fairs along with information sessions for what we hope will be a very robust employment opportunities for all around these communities.
Bob, excuse me, you were here, or Jenny at least was here, when we had the Access and Opportunity Committee presentation. Were you
Correct.
here? Yeah.
Jenny was here.
Okay.
I was out in Las Vegas for that.
It's a very it's very straightforward. It's blocking and tackling, but that's what makes this stuff happen. And if you haven't looked at it closely, just as a tool to help move things along, it's worth doing. It's a really good model, and I'm sure that the people, Susan Moyer and whatever the other woman's name is, who would stop by and talk to you about how to make it work. But it's a really good tool. For the best of intentions aren't enough, is the point. You really need on the ground committed support, not only from the top but at the grassroots, from the unions, from the subcontractors in particular. So it's an important model to follow up on.
Great. We will certainly make use of that information as well. But good to see, really, over the last few nights, the activity at the construction trades table. It was really a nice part of each of the sessions. The next thing that we've been working on extremely aggressively, surrounding community engagement. Right after the designation, I began reaching out to all of the communities that surround us. And quite honestly, the approach I'm taking is not just the ones that are formal. For example, I had a great conversation. We haven't met yet, but over the phone I met Kim Driscoll, who's the mayor up in Salem. They have a wonderful tourism community up there, and we know that a lot of guests that'll be visiting us are going to want to reach out around the area. So we talked about getting together at a later date. So I don't view this as simply the communities that we have agreements with. We're in a larger area here, and I think it's going to be ultimately important for us to talk to everybody. So we've been very aggressively trying to get out there and talk to our surrounding partners. Another good example is Jay Ash over in Chelsea was kind enough to give me a good hour and a half where he took me through all the upcoming economic development plans in Chelsea, and I have to tell you, it was a fascinating session. I had no idea that they've got, I think it's close to 1,000 different rooms on the books for smaller hotel projects in and around. He was telling me about the Silver Line and the new opportunities that'll be available at the transit station there. So I think it's important for us to learn a lot about what's going on in all of our neighboring communities, and we're going to just continue that outreach all the way through. And those discussions have really yielded good results, and I'm going to continue to schedule them. Other engagement with our surrounding communities, we listed a couple events on the next slide. We were involved with the Everett City Fest, supporting local vendors. We sponsored a concert series in Malden for the summer, and the mayor and the community was very thankful for that. We helped out at the community water chestnut removal project. That's something that's done annually over 4 days because it's important for the Mystic River. We've also went to the, I know Jenny went down to the Greater New England Minority Supplier Development Council. They had their conference, and we were represented there along with Gilbane. Other things that we're doing on the next slide, we have a great relationship with the Boston Bruins Foundation, and we're working them. We're right in the middle of a series with them for youth ice hockey clinics that we're doing in East Boston, in Everett, in Malden, and in Cambridge, and then the youth street hockey as well in Chelsea and Medford as part of the public school program. And then the wives of the Boston Bruins players are helping us out. They work with the Charlestown Boys and Girls Club, and they go out and they help them go out, and they go to a store over in Somerville. They purchase costumes and get them sort of ready for Halloween. But those are the kinds of things that we really like doing to get out there and show that we're going to be a good community partner for all of our surrounding areas. A couple other things I wanted to talk about. We're sponsoring some pretty important events coming up. Boys and Girls Club of Middlesex County, their annual gala. The Cambridge Chamber of Commerce, we just recently joined as a new member. There was a Chelsea Pot of Gold banquet, the Everett Independence Day celebration, Everett Chamber of Commerce, we were part of the annual golf tournament, the Veterans Inc. annual gala, the Malden Latino Festival, and the Malden Pot of Gold banquet. One other one I didn't mention on here, but we've been helping out the Charlestown Little League. They needed some improvements over at the Ryan Field complex, which is very close to where we are. And so they worked with us in telling us what the needs were, and then we recently were able to give them a nice check so they can get going on those programs. But it's a great group. I've met some of the folks over there, and we're happy to help out the Little League because they're going to be a good neighbor to us. I want to talk a little bit about diversity. We've had ongoing meetings with the Massachusetts Supplier Development Office, along with previously I mentioned the Greater New England Group. So we're not only focusing on just Massachusetts, but there are some good opportunities regionally as well. We've been working together with Jill and the Vendor Advisory and Workforce Development Team. We submitted a draft already of the diversity plan, and then we'll be working to finalize that in the near future. So all of those efforts have been going well, and In closing, what I really want to say is that we've been extremely busy, not skipping a beat, and really focusing a lot on outreach. And I think it's yielded very good results. And so we've hit the ground running since you made the designation, and we're going to continue to do so. And with that, Jackie and I are available for any questions.
Commissioners?
Do you see any roadblocks to your timetables that you've provided to us? I mean, you gave us a report today and talked generally how you're happy with the progress.
Very happy.
Right. So do you see anything that could create maybe a gap in time or some delays? Or
No, I think obviously our next big filing is the SFEIR, and we want to make sure on that particular document, accuracy is more important than speed. And so we want to make sure that we've addressed every single item that we got back in the Secretary's certificate, and so we can get that back in and have that go smoothly. So we're not sure which meeting yet we're going to get on the agenda for, or the submission date, but we are looking forward to getting that done before the end of the year. I just can't pinpoint the date. And everyone on our team has been focused on making sure that we accurately cover all the bases on that one.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else?
No, I think it sounds like a good report and good start, and we look forward to continued reports and progress as the months progress.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think that wraps up the Ombudsman report, and we are now going to move to item 5 on the schedule. Mark Vanderlinden, Director of Research and Problem Gambling, and his team.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning. Keep that mic close to your mouth.
Morning.
All right. How's that?
Good.
Good? Okay. The Responsible Gaming Framework was adopted by the Commission last month, September 25th. The Responsible Gaming Framework was designed and intended to inform our regulation as a Commission. It's also intended to inform practice, inform policy of our operators. Within that responsible gaming framework that was adopted was one issue that still remained somewhat unresolved. And so I want to bring that back before you with a report of some additional information. That specific section was section 2.2 within the framework, informed player choice. Under informed player choice is a specific section that addresses play management systems. And these play management systems really are tools that are incorporated onto the play management software, onto the player cards, to help inform players make better informed decisions about their specific gambling behavior. These types of tools are intended to be individualized for players, allowing them to do a host of things, but probably most specifically and overarching would be allow players to set predetermined limits on the amount of money or the amount of time that they're spending at a gambling session. There was a lot of controversy about this specific practice when it first came up and was first introduced into the framework. We've paid a lot of attention to that concern. We have engaged what were our applicants and now our licensees in a number of discussions dating back to May when it first came up at the Mass Partnership for Responsible Gaming meeting. We brought it back up again in July with a little bit more intensive focus on that. We brought in some local experts. We took a very close look at what evidence exists specifically for these types of play management features. What is the evidence? And quite honestly, what came out of that meeting, what came out of our research is that these are relatively new ideas. They're at times lacks a lot of clarity that we would normally be looking for if we said this is a best practice. But at the same time, I think that there's a lot of merit that warrants us to look at this further. And so with that, the Commission engaged the services of Judith Glenn, who is beside me here, and a team that she works with through her company, Strategic Science, to not just take a look at what we're seeing in terms of the research that has been published on this issue, but to dive down deep into the weeds and take a look at what was the experience of operators in other jurisdictions? What was the experience of gaming manufacturers? What was the experience of regulators? Both what is their experience as well as what is their recommendations on this specific issue. And that's what we hope to present to you today, and what I'll turn it over to Judith to present for you. So with that, I want to introduce Judith Glenn with Strategic Science and allow her to provide you a report and summary of the findings. Judith.
Thank you, Mark. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
It's a pleasure to be here, and certainly an honor to put a team together to help inform the great work you're doing in Massachusetts. So I first became involved with your commission when I worked with Mark to prepare for that meeting in July, where Dr. Leah Nauer, who is a leading researcher in the field, did a review of evidence, and I worked with Mark and Leah to facilitate that meeting. And the goal was to get that deep understanding of the concerns around this issue of pre-commitment as it was articulated in the draft of the framework that you had seen. And since that time, what we've done is take a look at the experience of other jurisdictions and bring to you our best advice based on the scientists on our team, their knowledge of the research literature and of the field at large. Certainly Dr. Alex Blazinski and Dr. Leah Nauer would be two of the leading scientists in the field of gambling and problem gambling research, and personally have contributed to the literature around limit-setting tools and pre-commitment. And so what we wanted to do was draw on that experience and then draw on the experience of a number of jurisdictions that had implemented these tools in order to bring the kind of information that you needed to make your decision. So we do have some recommendations for you, but first maybe a little bit of background. Maybe if we could move to the next slide. We looked at the countries of New Zealand, Canada, Australia, Norway, Sweden, and Singapore. So there were two things that we did when we looked at these countries. We gathered documents, and that included any documents that their regulator or government agencies had produced to announce it, news releases, press releases, media coverage. We looked for evaluation reports, any kind of documents that we could get that would give us an insight into the kinds of things we needed to know. So what we wanted to know from these jurisdictions was what were your objectives when you envisioned the program? Who was your target audience? How did you design the program? What were the key elements of it? What did the customer interface look like? What software, what hardware? How did people access it? And then things like, what was the customer response? Did you do marketing and promotion? Did you do education? Did people understand the tools? What was the technological interface like? How was implementation? Did it go smoothly? Were there major glitches? Were the glitches technological, operational, or in terms of customer understanding? Was staff training what was lacking? And then we asked them some bigger questions, like what lessons did you learn? What do you plan to do to improve the program? And then finally, if you were giving some advice to the state of Massachusetts on how to do this, would you recommend that they do it? And if you did, how would you say they should do it?
Ms. Klein.
Yes.
Did you look at jurisdictions within the states? You mentioned the state of Missouri.
There are two examples. Missouri's loss limits experiment from 1995 to 2008. The challenge with those examples, and what I'll speak to maybe a little bit more in the presentation, is that what what was really being evaluated was a mandatory registration process. And what we found when we looked at the countries that we did, if you could back up a couple of slides, is that when you had mandatory registration, it completely clouded the customer response to the limit-setting tools. So the challenge in the Missouri loss limit experiment was that everybody had to register and everyone had to use that card with the limit on it. There was no voluntary aspect to it, and so it was difficult for us to use that as an example, and it was true of some of the other examples we used. Iowa also briefly experimented with loss limits, but again, these were imposed limits. They set a certain dollar amount, $50 per session in Iowa, $500 per 2-hour session of play in Missouri, but it was mandatory registration and mandatory use of the card and mandatory limits. There was no flexibility. So we didn't look too deeply at those because there were richer, more current examples in other countries. But we certainly looked at those for their relevance to what you want to do.
Nova Scotia also introduced it mandatorily, right?
Yes, it is perhaps the most cloudy introduction of play management tools that we saw in any jurisdiction. And we'll probably speak a little bit more in detail about that as we go forward. But Nova Scotia is, if I may, it is probably the most politically loaded gambling jurisdiction in North America. You might argue with me on that, but it's a small community. It's a small and largely rural community. A lot of people have jobs in the fishing industry, extremely high use of government income support programs through employment insurance and social assistance, further clouded by the fact that the operator is in fact government. So when they introduced the reforms, and particularly when they moved from the voluntary to the mandatory model, it became a game to defy government's attempts to monitor and control our behavior. So it really wasn't about limit-setting tools in many senses. The challenge for us with each of these jurisdictions was finding the elements that would be relevant to the kind of model you were looking at here in Massachusetts. So we looked at all of those. We looked at what we could glean from them, but in some cases, their results were so influenced by things like mandatory registration and the reaction to that, the sort of visceral reaction that citizens had, that it was very difficult to get a clean evaluation of how the limit-setting tools were used and whether or not they were effective. And we did try to do that very much by looking at all of these different jurisdictions and kind of cross-referencing what we learned. But yeah, that's why you don't see us speaking specifically to the Missouri, that longer 95 to 2008 loss limit experiment, or well, it wasn't an experiment, it was a policy, and then the Iowa one as well. So if you could, yeah, well, let's do this. Okay, so we'll jump ahead a little bit. So what we were looking at were all those things that I spoke to you about. In many cases, interestingly enough, the most valuable data for us was in trials rather than implementation. What we found with countries that had implemented limit setting were a couple of things. One is that in some cases they were reluctant to share too much in the way of hard data. They were very willing to speak to their qualitative experience, but in some cases it was difficult to get hard numbers. The trials, on the other hand, particularly...
Why was that?
Well, in some cases, it's too early. Singapore said it's just too early. We can't do it yet. Sweden said we're just meeting now to develop our data analytics plan and what our desired outcomes are and what we're going to measure. New Zealand said we put this program in place in 3 months and we didn't set specific objectives for it when we developed it. So in many cases, what we learned is that they hadn't actually specified their objectives at the outset. And so when we were asking them what they measured, in some cases they hadn't measured, but where there was a specific trial where they piloted the technology over a contained period of time, that's where we were able to get some of the data. So what I've done is just extract one jurisdiction, and this is the state of Queensland in Australia. They did 2 sets of trials. One was in the Redcliffe and I think it's Sandbank properties. And so there was one trial there where they implemented voluntary player registration. And then the other one was the PlaySmart analysis of a phase 1 and phase 2. So what they did here were two forms of voluntary registration or enrollment. Phase 1 was without incentives and phase 2 was with incentives. And so this is where we got some really interesting data where you can actually see some comparisons. What we heard from these jurisdictions loud and clear was that two major things really made it challenging. One was that they rarely implemented what they originally envisioned. Almost always, some kind of political influence came into play, and they went from voluntary to mandatory and back, or they went to mandatory with a watered-down version, or there was so much. Even in Norway, they only had 6 months with a voluntary system before the government changed and put a mandatory system in place. So they really said, envision a system and implement it cleanly. Do not change course partway through, because you're not going to get a smooth and a clean implementation. The other huge piece was you must educate staff and you must educate players. If you don't have that interaction between staff and players, you're not going to get people understanding and enrolling and seeing the tools as relevant. And related to that was this idea that unless you promote the program as normal, people will not see it as salient. They won't see it as relevant to them. If you say these are tools to reduce the harm from problem gambling, nobody will sign up. Even if you say they're responsible gambling tools, they think that that's for people who are already at risk. When they were positioned as normal budgeting and time and money management tools, that's when the success was seen. So in these Queensland trials, if we go back to the first slide on Queensland, one of the things they noted was that with active promotion, and they did some pretty active promotion, you can see they had a sign-on incentive, they had a chance to win a weekly draw. They dedicated 6 staff to working the floor and promoting the use of the tools and helping people through the sign-up process. They sent promotional letters to all of their players. And even with that, which in our review is probably as aggressive a promotion campaign as anyone did. Some of them did 0 or very near to 0 in terms of education and promotion, and many of them were catching up after implementation, realizing they had to train staff, send out ambassadors, that kind of thing. But if they did active promotion, it took 3 to 4 months for usage to peak. So that was where they would get players who were using the tools actively, setting real limits that had some meaning to them, and feeling that the limits were useful to them. So at the Sandgate property, after the 3rd month, that was when 90% of them enrolled, after the 3rd month. And in the Redcliffe property, it was after the 4th month that 79% of the players enrolled. So what you saw is that people needed some time to understand the tools, to get used to them, and then they started to use them in a meaningful way.
Excuse me, Judith, how do those numbers square with the 13 to 28%? So this says enrolled, but your report says that 13 to 28% actually used it and spent daily limits.
Yes, so these are subs of that 13 to 28%. So of the people who used the system, 90% enrolled in the 3rd month. So it was slow to get to that rate.
Oh, I see.
That's
Okay.
a percentage of people enrolled.
Oh, I see.
Sorry.
Okay, I thought you meant by the 3rd month you got, okay.
And those numbers are high. There are jurisdictions that were still experiencing that lower kind of 1% and below 10% uptake as well on the tools, which you'll see it continues to be a concern. So just as a comparison, they did 12 months without promotion, and it took them as long in 12 months to get the same number as they got in 4 months with promotion. So what this tells us is if you do it right, if you promote the program, if you educate players, if you have ambassadors, people will use the tools. So
Wait a
that's
sec,
important.
but you're saying that when they promoted the sign-up, you then got 13 to 28% to use it.
Within 4 months.
Within 4 months.
Whereas
which
with
was
the other
peak.
method, it took 12 months to get
Right.
there.
Okay.
So the interesting thing is you use the promotion to sign them on, then they signed on and said, hey, if I'd understood how valuable this was going to be, I would have signed on without incentives. But you have to have the promotion and the incentives to let people see the value. We heard that from every jurisdiction we spoke to. So if we just go to the next slide, We look at how did players respond to these tools? What did they think they meant for them? 100% of the players surveyed found the procedure was straightforward. They were really pleased with the customer interface. There were some specific findings around the customer interface. They really worked at making that a really warm and pleasant interface. Another thing we heard, for example, Norway said, ours looked too much like government collecting your data, and that's why people resisted. Make it warm, make it engaging. 95% felt confident using the card. They felt they understood and they were using it properly. 58% felt that it made them think more about how much money they were spending on gambling, and that's really important. Hang on to that thought. Making people think about how much they're spending on gambling, being more explicit in their decision-making. 45% said it made them think more about how affordable it was for them to gamble. They saw the card-based system of limit setting as a major benefit to them. So a benefit of having a loyalty card was having these limit setting tools. If we can go to the next slide. Oh, the maximum was interesting too. The $50 to $100 a day maximum is an interesting piece because you'll see in our recommendations, we talk about giving people some sense of what might be normal or average rates for gambling in a session. If we go to the next slide. Really significant improvement reported across all groups. I am going to point out that one of the flaws with the research around certainly the scientific literature around this concept of pre-commitment or limit setting is this really narrow focus on the harm from problem gambling. And if you think about these tools the way they were originally envisioned, that's not really what they're about. Despite that, there was some improvement in the problem gambler group, but this is not the target audience. One operator said to us, problem gamblers are our lost souls. We're not targeting problem gamblers, we're targeting the average player. 23% of those that would have moderate risk reported that they were better at sticking with their limits, the limits that they had set. 28% of players reported that they had reduced their spending and that it was as a result of using these tools. So 62% of them said, this made me think more explicitly about how much money I was spending on gambling. And if we can go to the next slide. And this just speaks to the details. It really came through to us from every single informant we interviewed, the details of how you do this, how the technology works, how the staff interact with the customers and the customers with the technology. This is going to determine whether you're successful or not. They really appreciated these 5 things: a personalized limit reminder message, setting limits based on the money you want to spend. So that was the way, well, how much do you want to spend on gambling today? That was a relevant way for them to think about what they were going to do that day. Sorry, that should be preset playing limits, not pre-sent, I'm sorry. So they appreciated having some preset limits that they could use to guide their behavior. They liked getting those player activity statements, which is part of your framework already. And that's good news. And they liked having these breaks where it said, okay, you know, you're at 60% of your limit now, you're at 90% of your limit now, oh, you're at 100% of your limit, your game has stopped, you need to make a decision now. Are you going to go forward or not? Because this is how much you said you wanted to spend.
So these are 5 ingredients to success, you said.
Yeah.
How do you define success?
How do we define success? Strong uptake, and the tools are seen as effective and valuable to your players.
By the players?
Yes. Yeah, and I'll speak to that, and that's very much how we think that this program should be positioned, as value to players. So if we go to the next slide.
So let me just, okay, if you're done with Queensland, that was the trial. That was the data from the 2 trials, right?
Yep.
So they now implemented this in 49 venues across Queensland, apparently.
Yeah.
And what's happening with
We don't have data from the implementation yet. The interesting thing is that Australia was the most hot debate around pre-commitment. I don't know if you're aware of that, but it was a huge political hot potato. In fact, you could say that at least one government fell over the issue of pre-commitment. So it
Really?
became
Wow.
very hotly debated in Australia. They're much more polarized in terms of the issue of gambling in Australia.
Don't they own the casinos in Australia, just like they do in Norway?
Oh, no, it's all private sector.
It's all private sector?
It's all private sector in Australia.
But they own them in Norway?
Yes, in Norway it is a government operator, yeah. And that actually would speak to some of that resistance in Australia because they're used to the private sector being able to do what it wants. So when this was going to be imposed, these mandatory limit-setting tools, that's where you got the resistance. And really the resistance was to the mandatory aspect of it. So,
Let me just go ahead.
yes.
with some of
No,
this.
that's, you answered my question. What was the polarization all about? And it was the mandatory aspect.
Well, I mean, the polarization is there in Australia around gambling already. Dr. Alex Blazinski, who was one of our team members, found himself in the midst of that storm where he was being seen by the responsible gambling advocates as being aligned with industry because he spoke out against mandatory limit setting and said it doesn't work. So one of the wonderful things about working with Dr. Blazinski on this report was that he came to say, I wholeheartedly, with every ounce of my being, support what we're recommending here because this is doing it right. And it will surprise people because of the way that he was perceived in that Australian debate as having aligned himself with the industry who were resisting the introduction of pre-commitment. But what he really spoke to was when you make it mandatory, you miss the point. And I guess that's what this slide is about.
So, sorry, one more Queensland
Yes,
question.
sorry.
When the trials were in 2005, when did they implement these in the 49 venues?
I don't know the exact date, Chairman Crosby.
More
I'm sorry.
or less? I mean, was it like several years ago? It was 10 years ago when they did the trial.
I would have to
All right.
look it up. I apologize.
Well, I think.
How long did the trial last? Do you
2
know
years.
that?
2
2
years. So
Yeah.
it would have, the soonest would have been 2008. So it'd be interesting to know, obviously, because the data that how the system is actually operating versus how it worked in this experiment would be tremendously interesting.
Yeah. Well, we did get that from a lot of the jurisdictions who had it in place, and I think what I might suggest and ask questions as we go, but when we get to speaking to some of the specific recommendations that we've made, maybe what I can do is talk about which jurisdictions fed into those or drove some of those recommendations in terms of their experience with the limit-setting tools, and that might give you a sense of what you're looking for there, because you're looking for who's doing it right now. And the choice of Queensland was because they had really clean data for us to use. And that was challenging with the jurisdictions that have it in place. So this next slide is really about terminology. Oh, sorry, if we can go back to the pre-commitment slide. So one of the things that's happened in the world of gambling is that this issue of pre-commitment has come to be seen as a problem gambling prevention tool, or a tool that is really all about preventing people from developing gambling problems. But what we as a team would like you to do is go back to first principles. What does pre-commitment mean? It has a long history in the economics and consumer behavior literature, starting with, I think, Strotz, and then in the 80s, Thaler and Thomas Schelling, one of your most famous US economists, Nobel Prize winner. They spoke about this concept. They named it pre-commitment, but they said, we're not inventing the concept. What we're doing is naming a behavior that people use to manage themselves. And so what they really talk about in this literature is that we all understand that we are dynamic beings, that when we sit here in our calm and present state, when we think about our long-term goals for our weight and our physical health and our financial health and our relationship health, we say, these are the things that I want to achieve. But tonight after 2 glasses of wine, or on the weekend in the jewelry store in front of some sparkly baubles or some beautiful shoes, or all of these different things, we know that we will become carried away in that aroused state, and that we will potentially make decisions that imperil our long-term objectives. We all know this. We all do this. The wisest among us, more often than not, set limits on our future behavior based on our long-term objectives. We force ourselves to make the right choice later, or at the very least, we delimit our choices so that we can't do as much harm to our long-term objectives as we might when we're carried away. That's the concept of pre-commitment. It's not about people who have lost control. It's not about people who need treatment. It's about normal people being more explicit about how they manage themselves. And one of the best examples they used was the old Christmas savings account. They said the bank protects all of your savings accounts in the ways that it protects all of its accounts. But the Christmas savings account is more protected than the others because not only is it protected from fraud and you know, all kinds of other threats, but it's protected from its most important threat, you. So you create this savings account, you contribute to this savings account because you want the bank to put those administrative and sort of ceremonial barriers in place that will limit you or reduce the likelihood that you'll imperil your long-term objectives by spending that money. And that's the concept of pre-commitment. And so it's with that understanding of pre-commitment that we as a team are recommending that you implement pre-commitment. So then maybe if we move to the next slide. So the key question was, should Massachusetts move forward with a pre-commitment program? And the members of our team strongly and wholeheartedly recommend that you do. Not only do we think it would accomplish a lot of good, but you're in a wonderful position to benefit from the advances in technology, the reductions in cost, and the lessons learned from other jurisdictions in doing that. So we strongly recommend you do it. But we say with that if you're going to do it, you must make it meaningful and you must do it right. And so with that in mind, we have 15 detailed recommendations. They're not down to the finest point, but they speak to the things that we heard and read from these other jurisdictions in terms of the things that you need to do to make this an effective program. So maybe if we just look, what I've done is group the recommendations, not those 15 recommendations, not according to numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, but rather in terms of the goals that they speak to. So if we move to the next slide. So the two things, Chairman Crosby, you'll recall, the two things we heard from industry was around effectiveness were around uptake. Uptake rates are so low, it can't possibly be worth the money that we would spend putting this technology in place. So how do you influence uptake? That was a really big, important thing. And this is what we heard from the key informants, and this is what we derived from the reports. You must position these tools positively. You must show the players that these have value for them, and you must make them salient. Don't talk about them as preventing problem gambling. You don't even necessarily want to talk about them as responsible gambling. You might call it positive play. You might say they're budgetary tools. But that's in fact why we would recommend that you not necessarily use the term pre-commitment, because it's become sort of contaminated in the gambling world with its association with problem gambling. Position these as targeted to all players.
It's become associated with problem gambling and mandatory
Yes.
implementation.
So we actually, we all know words matter. And once words have become contaminated with associations, it's a lot more work to eliminate those associations than just shift your language. So call them limit setting tools or something similar to that, something that's very innocuous and that speaks to this idea that you're helping people manage themselves. You have to do strong education and marketing, and this is out and in. So you need to educate your players, but you also need the staff at these venues to be educated and to understand why the tools would be valuable to their players and what role they can play in helping players both understand why they're valuable and how to use them. And if you have that communication in those two directions, active promotion and education out to your players, and lots of internal promotion and education and training to your staff, the two come together. In New Zealand, they had almost a complete breakdown in communication because they implemented it so quickly, but they responded so quickly with staff training and ambassadors on the floor that they started to turn it around immediately. So really, this is a key part of making it work. Integration with loyalty cards. Everybody said to do this. Everybody said to make it as easy as possible and integrate it with their existing loyalty card so that it's a simple tool for them to use. And Key again, it must become a normal part of the play experience. Make it normalized. Incentives to encourage continued use. Almost no jurisdictions offered any incentives while you were using the tools. Some of them offered a sign-up bonus. None of them offered loyalty points while in play. It's a new thing that you can do to show players that it has value and that there's a reward for managing yourself well. So if I set limits, if I use the tools actively, I set limits and I maintain limits, I get bonused on that as well. That was a key that people recommended strongly. Default limits. This is going to be a little bit controversial. There are two things here, really two thoughts. Default limits and an opt-out program. These are the pieces that you'll probably have the most questions about. We wrestled long and hard as a team before making such strong recommendations, and we probed this issue with key informants. But at the end of the day, we strongly feel that you should make it an opt-out system. If you are indeed positioning this as a normal part of the player experience, then it should be that when they put their player card in, the assumption is made that they will set limits. And if they don't set limits, default limits will apply unless they actively say, you know what, I'm okay, I don't need to set limits. And then they opt out of the program.
Doesn't that start to sound like mandatory?
It's the first time they put the card in, they get the chance to say no.
But if you default them to say to opt out, you've assumed that it's...
You've assumed that it's the right choice and the normal choice. So if you look at any other instances where we use opt-out in society, it's because we're making it easy for people to do the smart thing.
But you don't opt out of a Christmas card, Christmas savings.
No, but you do out of environmentally friendly behaviors with power use and other things. There are increasingly structures put in place where you opt out if you decide you don't want to use the tool that's been offered to you.
Yes, but that is creating a normative approach to what may not be a normative in fact, a normative approach to the tool. I mean, if we really want, if we really want to make this a useful tool, and I think it is a useful tool to have in the arsenal, it seems to me one's far better off doing the kind of education and incentivizing and that would allow people to make the choice consciously and then use the tool and get the benefit from it. You talked about words have meaning, and they obviously do have meaning. And but using this as a budgeting device, the way you budget for furniture or shoes or booze, would be, it seems to me, a very helpful way to go about it. But once you begin to start defaulting people into it, and then, even worse in my view, defaulting people to certain limits that somehow express what is normative, strike me as the kind of thing that in fact can push people away.
I will
And sorry, just to finish that, and
yes,
give this whole regime the kind of nanny state approach that I think is particularly in this day and age terribly off-putting and counterproductive.
I accept your perspective, and it's definitely one of the more controversial aspects of this. If you accept that this would be a normal practice, that people should routinely be setting a limit when they walk into the facility anyway, and we're not talking about annual limits or anything like that. What we might talk about is within session limits and maybe monthly limits, because those are kind of the basis on which the average person budgets. If you're really positioning this as something that normally you'd like them to do, or normally they probably should do when they go gambling, then opt out, as long as you're very clear in your education and very clear when they put their card in that this is what's in place. You're more than welcome to change it. And you have staff trained to make sure that people understand that. And I would argue that in the gambling venues, they're going to want players to be making that explicit choice. then what you'll find is that players will begin to use the tools and see their usefulness over time. It's part of making it a normalized practice, but I understand that it's one of the more sensitive recommendations.
Can I
It
ask about-
definitely has some, some views on either side of it.
Can I ask about this notion of normal? We have a very tight market here in New England with players having multiple options, not just in Massachusetts, but nearby around it. How could something be normal to a player if it only occurs in Massachusetts, for example? Could the reality that our neighbors don't have these because they don't, or the culture around the United States, which is different from, say, Australia, that is surrounded by ocean, how could that be, perceived as normal in our state only?
Well, norms and attitudes shift over time, and you're certainly the leaders in other areas of what you're doing. I mean, Massachusetts is doing things in the implementation of gambling that no other U.S. state has done. Certainly in the regulatory structure, in the funds you've set aside for research, so you're leaders in a number of areas, and yes, you would be leaders in this area. You absolutely would be leaders. But norms aren't about what everybody's doing already. Sometimes norms and laws, or norms and rules, have a very dynamic relationship over time. And so if you talk about normal levels, then you make a statement about what you think is normative. But another part of this is that we're strongly recommending lots of player testing and lots of tweaking and refining as you put the system in place and seeing where the points of resistance are. And sometimes you think it's one thing and it's something else. So the jurisdictions that we talked to that were really making constant improvements in response to players were the ones that were successful. But yes, it would set you apart from your fellow states. There's no question about that.
There are two tiers to the opting in and out. You could have an opt-out program which assumes you're going to be setting limits, but has a button down below that says I don't want to set a limit. That's one level of opt-out. There's another level of opt-out, which is the default. If you
Yes.
don't do anything, a number comes up.
And we see those, they're paired here just for description, but they're two separate recommendations, and you could certainly do what you just said.
Right.
You could say opt out of limit setting at all and
Right.
not set default limits. There's no question that default limits are challenging. In Norway, they have a maximum of, it's not really a meaningful maximum. The daily maximum is 99,999 krona. So it's basically as high in 5 digits as you can get. And they had this idea that they could just give players a sliding scale so they could set their limit. But all the limits were in the middle, and so they did interviews, and everyone said, well, I consider myself to be an average gambler, so I put my level in the middle. And we found that very interesting. Most people wanted to know sort of what does an average gambler spend, and they wanted to put themselves in that range. And so that's part of the thinking around those defaults. So I think you should consider them as a commission as two separate recommendations. They're not dependent on each other. You don't have to do one and the other. We're recommending both.
Right.
But we recognize that there is controversy around both of those recommendations. Of the two, certainly the opt-out as an approach is one that we probably feel more strongly about than having the default limits, simply because it is challenging to give people what are normative limits. So you would need to be very careful, use data. There was one suggestion that the research team that you have here in Massachusetts might be able to, as part of their population survey, gather some data around what people consider to be normal spending on gambling. There are ways that you could use that, and then you could say, here are some limits that are based on, and tell them what they're from, and educate them so they know what those limits are based on. But definitely they are two separate recommendations. So, and we may go back to those, but I'll just quickly go through a couple of more, or this and two more slides, and then we can come back to the issues that you want to speak about the most. Multiple access points. Some players want help. They want to go to customer service, they want an ambassador on the floor, they want someone to walk them through it. Other players don't want anything, that imperils their privacy. They want to maybe do it on the website at home, where they log in, or they want to do it on a kiosk off in a corner, or they want to do it on the machine. So so New Zealand started off with just a kiosk, then they moved it to the machine they started with a machine interface, but some players were shy to set limits when there were players around them, so they set up kiosks, and their enrollment started to increase. So this idea of multiple access points that address both those who want help and those who want privacy. And then another one was, if people have opted out and said, I don't want to set limits, that doesn't mean they might not be rethinking it 3 months later. So have some milestones, say after 3 months or after they've gambled a certain number of times, where you ask them again, would you like to reconsider setting some limits for your daily or your monthly gambling? And so those features are all designed to make sure that you have the highest possible uptake of these tools. And over time, people will see them as valuable and useful, and you'll start to see the kind of data that we saw in Queensland in terms of the response and the usefulness to players. There are another set of recommendations on the next slide that talk about how do you make sure they're effective. So one of the things that the team talked about is, if you're going to do it, they need to be meaningful, they need to be effective. They actually need to give people that pause so they have time to do that self-management. So one of the things that seems to be standard in I think all but one jurisdiction is that once you've set your limits, if you decide you want to raise them, then you have to wait 24 hours for that raise to take effect. In one jurisdiction, New Zealand, as long as you're below 80% of your limit, you can raise and lower without any consequences. But once you start to near your limit, then you have to wait 24 hours for a raise. And that's where they're trying to prevent people from getting carried away in this aroused state. So definitely recommend a cooling off period for increases to take effect. Lowering limits should take effect immediately or as quickly as the gaming management system is able to respond. So sometimes, they might go a few dollars over or something just because they're in the middle of a game. We're not talking about a hard limit, but that lowering limits should take effect almost immediately. And what happens then when they reach the limit in some of these jurisdictions? This is important. There are jurisdictions that simply log you out for the day. You're done. We know that that's probably not the right option for Massachusetts. So we thought about it. How do we make the tools meaningful so that we're in keeping with that concept of self-management that this term was first invented for?
Yeah, and voluntary, right?
Yes. So we want the screen to stop. We want the game to stop and for it to say to you, you've reached the limit. Well, first of all, at 60 and 90 maybe, or 75 and 85, different jurisdictions have tried different thresholds. And then when you get to your limits, it should say you've reached your limit. And you have to acknowledge that. And then if you want to continue, and then the game stops, and the screen, you're not in the middle of your game anymore. It's telling you that you've met your limit. If you decide you want to continue playing, you're reminded that for any play after that, you're no longer going to collect loyalty points. So we're trying to disincent you to go beyond your preset limits until the next time period, the next session or the next month or whatever it is that you've set that limit for.
But you earlier were talking about incentivizing by adding points if you signed up.
So if you went beyond your limit, so let's say you reach your limit and you maintain your limits over a certain number of visits, well, you would get rewarded for that. And so one of the things you would be notified of is you're not going to get those bonus points for maintaining your limit, and we're not going to give you bonus points for the gambling that you continue. So if you gamble another $200, you will not collect loyalty points for that extra $200.
But could the mind then say, well, I already had a bonus because I signed up for the limit. I already was ahead, quote unquote, in my points. I'm going to be able to now afford not accruing any more points, and I would be awash.
But you'd also have foregone the extra points you'd have gotten for maintaining your limits. So hopefully, what we're trying to do is make sure there's no...
You're going to take back the points that I had by signing up.
No, you get sign-up points, but then you also get points over time for maintaining limits. So we're recommending both, that you get some points for setting limits, but then you also accumulate some points over time for maintaining limits. And then if you start to exceed limits on a regular basis, you won't get those points for maintaining limits anymore. But we're further recommending, and a number of jurisdictions are doing this, once you set the limit that you told us you wanted to play for, you're not going to get any more loyalty points until the next 24-hour period or the next, and you're notified of that. So again, you're notified. There is also the option of having every 30 minutes after that a reminder. Remember, you said that your limit for today was, you could do it every 30 minutes, every hour, every so many spins, whatever you like, but just to sort of reinforce that idea that they said in their calm, wise state that they didn't want to spend any more than this. And then the last piece was the provision of complementary play information tools. So a lot of these programs had all sorts of other play management tools in place. I would argue that what you've already got in your framework represents a very fulsome set of complementary play information tools. So you have those pieces in place to complement a limit setting system for your players. And then just one more slide. So I think the biggest message from the team that worked on this is that Massachusetts is in the very wonderful position of being able to benefit from the passage of time and experience. And so, in the early iterations of limit setting tools or play management systems, you saw jurisdictions that, at least in one case, spent millions to develop software and hardware, to retrofit across 4 or 5 different machine manufacturers with a number of different platforms and gaming management systems. There was hardware, there was software, there were large annual operating costs. That is simply no longer the case. As this has become a more commonly used tool in more than a dozen jurisdictions in the world, the gaming technology industry has responded. The technology has advanced, and you now have off-the-shelf packages that are tied to gaming management systems or that can be put on top of a coordinated set of gaming management systems that can implement limit-setting tools. I understand that Mark has some information for you on what he's been quoted as current day costs for those systems, but you're now talking about, a total capital cost of well under $200,000, maybe $300,000, $350,000 in year one, and annual licensing fees that range anywhere from $50,000 to $200,000. This is not expensive in the context of the gaming industry. It's no longer costly the way that it was 7 or 8 years ago. And also the advances in technology, the refinements. The New Zealand experience was perhaps our favorite in terms of relevance for you as a jurisdiction. They did a really good job of having tremendous clarity in their regulation. In fact, Bally, in response, said that was the easiest build because their regulations were so specific that we were able to build exactly the system they wanted. And it was very much a collaboration in New Zealand among regulator, gaming operator, and gaming technology company to build that Bally system, which now will be a world-leading system. It's part of their executive bonus suite. One of the charms of the system or attractions for a gaming operator is that when you're playing at machine 227, it can send a message directly to that machine and say, we know you like this game, would you like to switch? Or we know you like this and it's on special in the dining room and we'd like to give it to you today. So it has that direct to the individual, to the machine they're playing, ability to bonus. And so it's a very attractive gaming management system, but it has this feature that can be added on for a very modest cost in comparison to previous technological offerings. So you have the benefit of that development in technology and that lowering of costs, which is the case with any new technology. But you also have increasingly, so the government of Nova Scotia was extremely forthcoming in terms of all the things they did wrong and all the things that they would recommend you do right. And when asked, do you think that limit-setting tools are good? They said absolutely. In fact, every other member, so Nova Scotia is part of the Atlantic Lottery Corporation, which is 4 provinces in Eastern Canada. So they together manage gaming, and all the other provinces are this year rolling out the GTEC system for limit setting. Nova Scotia is going to take a break because of the heatedness of the political situation. But when asked what they're doing next, they said, we consider these tools to be an industry best practice, and we are going to be watching for what the right solution is for Nova Scotia. So what we heard is that it has benefit, and then they told us how to ensure its success. And that's what you see in some of these detailed recommendations, and certainly in some of the conversations that we've had with Mark around things that you could do, keeping it very simple, only introducing very modest limits initially, things like that. So we really feel that here in Massachusetts, you are very much in the position to benefit from that learning across the world and from those advances in technology and the decreasing costs to do something in Massachusetts that will be really leadership work.
Thank you very much. That's really well thought. Questions?
Yeah, I'm having I looked with Mark at G2E at some of the tools that are there. They're there. The interface is simple. They're easy to use. I believe that they are a useful budgeting device if properly presented to a player. But you've defined, but then when we get into some of the detail, I still am having difficulty, and I don't want to beat the horse that I just beat a few minutes ago, but...
No, please.
No, that horse is tired.
It's already dead? Okay.
Tired.
But tired, it's tired.
Okay.
It's still
Give it a
standing,
rest.
Still standing. But more thematically, you defined a success as high uptake and player satisfaction, player belief in the utility of the tool. And I accept those, I can understand those two philosophically. But then when we begin to drill down into the specifics and that menu of specific items designed to assure success, if success is designed subjectively, it seems to me that we are getting into a realm without a lot of data that's designed to tell people what a useful tool ought to look like, rather than the tool that they believe is in fact useful. And to the extent we do that, it seems to me, particularly without data, a lot of data to support it, we do run the risk of getting back into that philosophical quagmire that I articulated in connection with those two other specifics. And that, rather than the concept as a whole, is where I'm having a little bit of difficulty. Not with the concept, but with the detail.
Yes. And I think from at least half of the informants that we interviewed, they said, a couple of them said more player testing, or a lot more player testing, or do more player testing and then do more and then do more. So they really did talk about working with people to figure out the best way to introduce these tools, or the best way to have the tools function. If you have a lot of discomfort with the idea of default limits or of opt-out, it may be that you could get some data beforehand that would help increase your comfort or your sense of whether or not people would see this as useful and helpful, or whether they would see it as intrusive. Because I think that's at the heart of what you're saying, is that if we want them to adopt it and we want them to see it as normal and we want to see it as useful, we don't want to annoy them at the beginning by suggesting that we know better than they do, by offending them, by intruding too much into their ability to manage themselves. And I agree that that is something that needs to be done with care. But I think that you could gather enough information with some fairly simple work to be able to introduce a program that may be staged, where you would be able to have confidence that you were going to overcome that.
Got it. Thanks.
I was interested, I know that I saw Singapore on the one chart, but then, I believe you said that there was too soon to have data?
Yeah, they've actually agreed to meet with us in November.
Oh, they
So
have?
one of the things that I I would like to do with some indulgence from Mark is there are some jurisdictions that said, I will have data on this date, or I'll be in Toronto on this date. Can I come and talk to you then? Because I can't officially, basically in Singapore, he said, if you want me to officially transmit information, there's a formal approval process that has to come from your commission to my government. And, you know, it was quite an elaborate thing, and it's too early. But I'm going to be in Toronto in November, and I'd like to talk to you about what we're seeing so far. So in the case of Singapore, we did not get to do any key informant interviews. All we got to do was look at their process and their system.
What is the process? What is the model in Singapore?
It's a mandatory model.
It's mandatory.
It is
Yeah.
mandatory.
Yeah.
Well, they also struggled early, or not, well, they debated whether Singaporeans could gamble there. There was a big emphasis on,
You know, they
only
pay
emphasis on
$100
tourism.
for a day pass.
Right. Right.
Other questions?
I think, you know, it was already discussed, but I had thought about this. Throughout the report, there's a little bit of a notion that of mistrust to government watching. Yeah. And in this day and age, as Commissioner McKee was probably alluding, Big Brother, the notion that somebody's always watching, it occurs to me that maybe a disincentive for people to use some of these tools in general. But I'm also interested in whether you would think that cultural beliefs and attributes, differences between the United States and, say, Australia or Norway. I can think of Norway because I had a roommate from Norway, and the acceptance of government is very different, or what the government's role, for example.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about that? And that's the context that I was looking at in my previous questions as to how could that be perceived as normal here in Massachusetts.
I want to talk a little bit about culture too in another sense. But first, let's talk about the issue of government and culture around acceptance of government kind of intrusion or monitoring in your life. Certainly, even Sweden, where they said we have to present our SIN number to do almost anything, we got heavy resistance when we had mandatory registration for gambling because it was one area of people's lives where they didn't have to register. And so when we required them to register, we got great resistance. Certainly, I think when there is that sense of government imposing some form of monitoring or control of behavior, you will get strong resistance. I'm not sure that that is relevant to a U.S. state because you have private operators. And we didn't see that resistance as much in jurisdictions where private operators were the ones who, so in New Zealand, Sky City implemented their pre-commitment or limit-setting program at the Auckland and the Christchurch locations. They unrolled it. I think they had 7 days notice, unrolled it across all of their machines. Highly successful. It was not seen as imposed by government at all because the private sector operator implemented it. And so they worked with the players to educate them, and the players saw the casino as putting it in place rather than government. So definitely in jurisdictions where government is the operator, an agency of government is the operator, so that's true of Norsk Tipping and Svenska Spel in Norway and Sweden. It's true in every province in Canada. But in Australia, New Zealand, in the US, you have private sector operators. So at most, people would have to reach beyond the operator and say somehow you were forcing the industry to do something that was good for them. But I would argue that in the US, because there is maybe some cynicism about the gaming industry, that it would almost counter any sense that this was government control. People would see it as, yeah, it's a good thing that the casino has to offer me these tools. It's something that's helpful to me. So I think in terms of that culture, it was where it was mandatory, and more important than limit setting, it was registration, that they had to register with all their personal information, and that would go to government. And the big concern in Nova Scotia was that it was going to go to the tax office, and that it would imperil their government assistance programs. Right. They couldn't shake that. They couldn't shake it. It didn't matter how much education they did. People believed that information being gathered by the government agency that ran gambling was going to share it with the government agency that collected their taxes. So you simply don't have that dynamic here. I agree that you need to be careful that it doesn't seem Big Brother-ish. I understand Commissioner McHugh's concerns, and I think they're very legitimate, but I don't think you're going to run into that same sense that government is somehow monitoring them, or that someone knowing how much they spend on gambling will affect whether they can collect their social assistance check. The other piece, though, that you reminded me of that I'd forgotten was that there were some cultural influences at play in some of these jurisdictions, where they found that, for example, in New Zealand, their Asian players were not using the tools. And so they did interviews with their Asian players, and what they said was that I'm here to gamble. Why would I set limits? It's all about gambling and having fun, and so then they brought in models from countries like Singapore and used the kind of language that they had used in those countries around managing play, and then they did some interactions. They put the screens in both English and Chinese, and the uptake in the Asian population rose because they got sensitive to the cultural differences. They asked questions, and then they responded accordingly. So I'm not sure the extent to which in Massachusetts you might have large cultural groups that you would need to have that same kind of sensitivity to, in terms of maybe some targeted education, some ambassadors on the floor, and maybe messaging that's slightly different. So that was another finding that we had from some of these jurisdictions.
When did New Zealand implement its system?
2011, I believe.
And what's the uptake in New Zealand?
I don't know what it is right now. I know after 6 months it was only 1%. So they've been working very hard to increase it. Actually, no, it wasn't 2011. It's 2012 for New Zealand.
And when you talked to them, you didn't ask them what the uptake was now?
I did, and they said they didn't have that data yet.
It's hard to believe. Okay, have they implemented all of these reforms that they are recommending we adopt?
They've implemented many of them, and they were very interested in things like incenting with loyalty points. So they actually think they're going to start doing that. But a lot of the promotion and staff training came from their ideas. I mean, they were recommended in other places, but they've done a lot of work with the technological interface, moving the buttons around and making the screen very user-friendly. Initially, it took over a small part of the screen. Now it takes over the whole screen. So they've implemented, I would say, the vast majority. They don't have opt-out. They have a shopping list of default limits. So it's not one, but it's a few choices. So they've moved to those because what they were finding is that I think 90% of players wanted to just pick from a list, and only a small percentage wanted to set a very specific dollar amount. Trying to think of the other recommendations. I think pretty much everything other than opt-out and a preset default limit.
I've talked about this a little bit with Mark. My sense is that the logic of the idea is really hard to argue with. It seems like offering people an opportunity to control their utilization of this system, on a voluntary basis makes all the sense in the world. And, the way you couch it in a sort of a philosophic, economic model structure, and pointing out that we have similar systems in other aspects of our lives that we tend to have a hard time controlling is very persuasive and interesting. I agree with Commissioner McHugh that some of the particulars, like the default limit, I wrestle with the idea of restraining people's ability to change their mind, to change their limit. I'm not sure what right we have to do that. And I'm troubled by the idea of having the operator reward people for not playing. That seems so counter-systemic and counterintuitive. But be that as it may, I mean, conceptually, I think it's a very persuasive structure. What troubles me is that, as best I can tell, there's not a single model out there where the system has operated with conditions approximately similar to ours, where we have any information about what's happened. We have the one model in Queensland, which was a trial. We might have data if we can learn what's going on in New Zealand, and if we learn what's going on in the 49 venues in Queensland, maybe we will have some real data. But at this moment in time, we would be the first jurisdiction in the world, not the United States, but the world, that we know of, to really implement this on a go-forward basis with basically zero actual data. And do we want to be the first ones who do that? There are, apparently BC, British Columbia, is going to institute a system, you said in here, I think pretty soon, starting next year, that's quite similar to ours.
Yeah.
There are New Zealand and Queensland, there are a number of them that are teed up to be the first out there that are in a way quite similar to what you're proposing for us. So besides the particular details that I have trouble with, what I'm wrestling with in my mind is totally not made up on this, is should we wait a year or two and let these 3 or 4 or 5 jurisdictions out there that are really doing pretty much what we're talking about and use the benefit of their experience, or should we be the first ones out of the block to do that?
I think we would say that you have enough information to know that it's valuable and it can be made effective.
How can you say with conviction to the operator who raises the question of it costs X and the uptake is so low it's not worth, the cost benefit thing that they came up at that last meeting, how can you say with conviction that there's enough utilization of the system to rationalize the cost?
What would be enough utilization to rationalize $50,000 to $200,000 a year across a casino of 2,500 machines?
Well, it's 1,200 we're talking about here, but I don't know. There's an economic analysis, but play that out. I mean, if the uptake is 1%, which seems like a pretty reliable minimum, because we know you can get 1%. What are the economics of that? Is that?
Well, I would say that 1% is the minimum.
Right.
1% is jurisdictions that instituted the program with very little energy.
No, I understand that, but we don't know of a single other system that has gone above 1% on
an ongoing basis. I mean, we know of trials, 2-year trials, where
yeah,
we got to
right.
Yes, to the 13 to 28% range.
Right.
So I think one of the things you need to do is to think about what's enough? How many players could be helped through this program that would be enough? What would your gambling population be estimated at here in the state of Massachusetts?
Rachel? Everybody.
How many adults? 150? No, casinos usually 30 to 40% of the population.
30%.
So let's do 30% of 5 million. Does anyone have a calculator? Could we?
30% of 5 million is what, 1,500,000?
Okay.
Right.
And so if you help 1% of them and they manage their finances better and their families aren't affected by the impact, I would warrant that even at 1%, it's valuable and worth doing. But you can achieve so much more than 1%. That's jurisdictions that have done it badly.
And I would argue that I would argue that we have, this is one element that we have a lot of control over, the level of uptake. And I think that we already have pieces in motion that would encourage a much greater uptake than jurisdictions that did a poor rollout of these types of, this type of program.
But think of that for a moment. 1% of, do you say it was 1.5 million? So 1% of 1.5 million at a cost of a licensing fee of $50,000 to $200,000 a year could be helped to manage their gambling spend more responsibly. That's compelling. From a public health perspective, that's very compelling.
But now that drives me back to how you define success. And you didn't define success, and this is part of my struggle. Although intuitively, as I said, I still believe that this is a useful thing to have in the menu.
Yes.
You define success as a tool that people found useful subjectively, not a tool that produced a result. And now it seems to me you're shifting into result land.
Well, the whole area of how you would evaluate this system is one that we do speak to a little bit in the report, and I would argue that you would need to sit down and have some hard objectives. You would. So
Right.
not just, yeah, I thought it was useful.
Right.
But I do agree that you would want to have some harder objectives that talked about impact beyond just whether or not the person felt they were maintaining limits better. But you asked me what is successful, and I didn't
No, I
say
asked
did
you
they
how you
feel they were valuable, that they were valuable. So what is successful is that tools are valuable to players. And how you determine what that value is, part of it's going to be intellectually, you know, are they more aware of their spend? And part of it is going to be much more subjective. You know, how is it affecting their lives? Is gambling representing a more manageable part of their lives? What kind of impact is it having on their relationships? I would argue that, yes, you would want to, for your entire responsible gambling framework, and I believe you do have those kinds of measurements that are going to be taken in your population to see whether or not the population feels healthier about gambling, more positive toward gambling, healthier in terms of families and relationships. So I wasn't saying it's just do they feel good about using the tool. I was saying does it have value for the players?
Well, that's, I didn't understand that.
I'm sorry if I sorry.
Yeah, no,
that would be.
I'm sure you were clear and I misunderstood. But then we don't have data now to know whether these tools are going to yield that kind of substantive result, right?
Well, if substantive is that small percentage that uses it even at the most minimum promotion or lack thereof, and in those cases muddied implementation that shifted
Right.
from 6 month to 6 month or as elections came and went, even if you look at those minimal numbers and all you've achieved is helping that percentage of gamblers to gamble in a way that is more explicitly what they wanted to do, then I still think that's a tremendous social good. So
Yes,
if
if it
you
does.
said as a
If it
commission,
does,
we'll
yeah.
only be successful if
does.
we achieve these other outcomes, because I'm anticipating that as part of your responsible gambling framework, there will be targets, and these will be measured through the research that the team at UMass is doing in terms of sort of community wellness, as well as some very tangible economic figures. I would argue that this would be a large contribution to that framework in terms of impact. Of all the things you're talking about in your responsible gaming framework, this one is one of the most powerful tools based on what we've read and what we've seen and what we've heard.
Okay, I hear you.
What about the notion of a trial? I didn't see that in the recommendations, like many other jurisdictions have done.
Could you give me an example of when you say
Do you mean one of your
trial?
facilities?
Right, right. Or a subset of, some machines exploring. It occurs to me that many of these jurisdictions made some mistakes and have some recommendations because as they went through it.
I think if
and
you-
some of them went through it in a trial, on a trial basis, work out the kinks along the way.
I think if you did that, you're potentially putting, I mean, you have a built-in trial, frankly. You have one facility that's going to open at least 2 years before any others. That's your trial. But if you have one doing it and one not, you've created a competitive imbalance. And so if you want to use your first facility opening as your trial and reserve the right to decide whether you roll it out across the remaining operators, that would be operationally wise. But I would not have a situation where some of your facilities are required to do it while others aren't.
And that takes me to my point about New England. 2 of them in Connecticut with the same driving distance to a lot of the population here in Massachusetts will not have them.
But doesn't the fact that it's voluntary negate that?
Anyway.
Largely, you got it.
I honestly believe that if you position this well, the jurisdictions that are now rolling it out are BC. It's being called a benefit of loyalty membership. that we give you these tools. They are not positioning this as anything negative at all. If you sign up for our loyalty program, you get all of these things, and we give you these budgeting tools, and they're great.
Just to reiterate, I mean, I've said to some of our operators that I think there's a potential win for an operator to lead. I mean, this is the only, or this is the criticism that is the most compelling of this industry. And if this industry could neutralize or substantially neutralize this criticism, I think it would go a long way towards advancing in the long run the interests of the industry. And I think an operator could be a hero in leading the way here.
I would allow your operators to take all the credit.
Oh, for sure, right. But if it's going to be imposed by us, if they don't come to that same conclusion, it's just, you know, it is an opportunity. And we've talked about this, and we've talked with our operators about this. It is an opportunity for us to do the real sine qua non trial. We have a trial opportunity coming up, as you said. But do we want it to be we who are the first out of the box to?
But you're not. You're coming out of the box with the benefit of everyone else's experience.
But we've also got to be clear about what we're trying to achieve. And you know, if you take a look at the automobile industry, for example, when safety, seat belts, roll bars, all this other kind of stuff was initially promulgated through government regulation, there was resistance to it. And soon, not soon, but over a period of time, the automobile industry came to begin to tout safety as a selling device, and it caught on and it increased sales. So it seems to me that your point is well taken. But it seems to me we've got to be clear about what we're trying to do. And if we're trying to find something that is useful to the player and market this as a voluntary thing that may be useful to players, that's one thing that seems to me to be an easy sell. But on page 15 of your report, you said that at one venue, participants who set limits reported a 40% reduction in spending compared to those who did not set limits. If we're trying to reduce spending, and that's the goal, then it seems to me we've got a very different kind of regime and a very different kind of objective that may not be consistent with the operator's ability or desire to market this as a useful thing to get people to come. So it seems to me from a whole host of standpoints, we really need to be clear about what we're trying to do and then devise a program that will accomplish that goal.
I absolutely agree with you. I really do. You know, when we talk about evaluation, it starts at the beginning. You can't evaluate if you don't articulate up front. Yes, we would like to do this, and let's start to drill down to what we think it will achieve. And we didn't do that in this report. We didn't drill deeper than those high-level objectives that I spoke of. But as part of an evaluation strategy, one of the jurisdictions said, have that evaluation and data analytics plan ready up front. So yes, I agree that you would need your staff to work at saying, these are the kinds of objectives that we're going to target to achieve, and then we're going to have every feature line up with those objectives, because that's what you're saying about the default limits, is are they consistent with the positioning? And I agree that you need to take care with that. You need to be very clear that these are the objectives you're trying to achieve, and it's probably more about a sense of wellness around gambling, a sense of having participated freely and actively and being happy when they left as they were when they came in. Those are the kinds of things you're going to want to get at, and those are the kind of things you're going to want to measure, and you're going to want your objectives to line up with that, the features of the system to line up with that, and the evaluation design. So I do agree, and I do think you have to wrestle with those two elements that you've identified as sensitive. And if you're going to do them, then you need to be very careful about your education, your promotion, and your positioning, and the way that you evaluate against those objectives at the end of the day.
I noticed too the same thing that Commissioner McHugh said about the 40% reduction in spending, and this is one of the things about being first out of the blocks with a full-blown program. If that 40% reduction in spending was a consequence of taking at-risk gamblers and having them not move down the continuum towards problem gambling because they were able to control, and by controlling, they reduced their gambling by 40%. That's a consequence that, although that might be tough for the industry, I'd be comfortable with. If it's because the devices were an annoyance and they hated it and they went out and went to the one in the other state, I would not be happy with that.
Or
And-
if it's
and we-
because they
and-
think you're trying to collect
or
too much
because we're-
data.
Right.
Yeah.
And we don't know that. And we do have the ability to find out. I mean, we have, as you said, we have a very, very good research team here.
Yeah.
And a big research budget. And we could find out whether this really will work or not, and are the suppositions that are built into this right or not. But if there are unintended consequences, like that 40% is for exogenous reasons, not actually saving people going down the continuum, then we will have done real damage to the industry in our experiment, in our trial. And, you know, that's, if other people had done it, if we really knew what happened in New Zealand or in Queensland or any of these other places, with a full-blown, mature trial, then we would not be imposing that element of risk by having the trial be ours. And that's where I'm wrestling with. But anybody else? I think you did an extremely thoughtful job, Judith, under rigorous questioning. You know, you're articulate and thoughtful. I think you articulate the very best of the theory, and to the extent that there is practice on this, and I commend you for that, and I commend you, Mark, for doing it. It's a big, important, challenging issue. I hope the press is paying attention, because this conversation probably has never happened in any other gaming commission in the United States, and I'm proud of you guys for helping us have it. We decided to have at least a 2-week period of comment, as we so often do. We are inviting our operators or anybody else to comment on this. Mark is taking the lead. It's his job to come up ultimately with a recommendation, and I know he's wrestling on this. He will incorporate whatever feedback we get over the course of the next week or 10 days. And then perhaps as soon as the 6th, which is where it's presently intended, Mark will come back with a recommendation, and we will see what we can come up with.
I just echo that. I was aggressive in the questioning, and it is because I'm fascinated by this topic. I think
Yeah.
it's as important a topic as we are taking up, and it is really, it's really great to have a thoughtful, many thoughtful observers and researchers here to present this, and I too think this is a terrific report and great food
Thank
for
you.
thought.
I
Very important.
wish you had been able to be there when Leah and Alex and Karen, when the four of us were having these teleconferences over and over again and teasing through and working through, because you would have heard your concerns and heard us
Oh, I'm
work
sure,
through
I'm
them.
sure.
And
Right.
it was a wonderful process. I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If there is any, by the way, any opportunity to get any more data from New Zealand or Queensland, that would be all to the good.
And Singapore and Norway, they're all prepared
Well,
to.
Norway is a mandatory, right?
Yes.
So it may-
Although they've done some really
And
neat
Singapore.
things with what the limits should be,
Yeah.
which we'll learn.
Okay.
An interesting tiny little aside, they had a sliding bar, everyone wanted to be in the middle, so now they're trying to gather data on what would be normative levels of gambling. So I think there's stuff to be learned from those jurisdictions, and we will continue to gather it.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
May I recommend that we have a 1-week period for comment, and then that would allow me adequate time to review the comments to bring this back with a recommendation on the 6th.
Right. Most of our operators are here, I'm sure, but Hank, you might want to make sure we send it out widely that we're looking for comments in the next week on this issue. Thank you very much. Really
Thank you.
fascinating.
Thank you.
Okay. It is 1:45. I think what we're going to do is take a lunch break. We have, I think, is 45 minutes enough? We would start at 1:30. Does that work for everybody? Sure. Lunch is here.
Works for
Works
us,
for
but
us.
not for the audience.
Yeah, right.
The audience, that's right.
You want to make it an hour? We lose most people in the afternoon anyway.
What's on for
No, let's make it 1:30. Let's make it 1:30. We'll be back here at 1:30. All right, thanks, everybody.